So
Ah,
I wanted to get together and talk to you about something that I already kind of talked to you about a couple days ago. Remember, I said that I had a friend who messaged me out of nowhere, and anyway, he proved himself to be a radical leftist, I guess, kind of ideologue. And
we've known that for a while about him, right?
yes, we have known that for a while, but it really hurt because and this is the whole point of this podcast, is to kind of try to understand the mentality of someone who is possessed by an ideology. It's similar to indoctrination, but I don't believe that my friend is indoctrinated. Well, I think he is to some degree, but he has the ability. He's not completely indoctrinated, let's say. It comes in layers, but he's definitely got a rigid mentality.
Well,
And
the good distinction to make. I think we'll focus more on ideology and belief
yeah,
systems, but when we're talking about indoctrination, that's more about like how it happens,
yeah.
how it can happen to people. But now we're focusing on the actual thing itself.
Exactly. That's beautiful. Very, very good distinction. So we entered a debate after I told you about, my heart racing, and I was kind of shitty. And because just to give people some context, I basically had an argument with him this summer, which is about 4 or 5 months ago already. And he said, I saw on his Facebook page that he had posted this article that was in support of this statue being taken down. It was a statue of Sir John A. Macdonald. For those who don't know, I believe he was the first Prime Minister of Canada. Anyway, it was in Victoria, BC. They were taking down
Maybe
this.
drunk too, by the way.
Yeah. So apparently, John A. Macdonald had done some pretty terrible things to, the indigenous peoples of Canada, which is, let's face it, something that is true of most colonizers in history. But so he saw it as viable to remove something that was so culturally weighted, let's say, in terms of, it has a lot of cultural weight in support of some, I'm not going to say minority, but of some kind of ideal or virtue, which is to restore integrity and restore, I guess, attention towards the disenfranchised, Native Americans. So my argument to him was that it's not a good idea, and that it's actually regressive to destroy culture, even if the culture has some kind of dirt on it, which, let's admit, there's no way that there's any sort of pure form of culture or pure form of human being wherein you could justify keeping, or holding up that person's sort of like memory forever. Whereas, sure, Sir John A. Macdonald had a lot of dirt on him, and so did Nelson Mandela, which I used like an example. And so these people have dirt on them, but it's what they did that we remember them for, right? In the good way. Now, can I say that we can remember Hitler in any kind of good way? No, of course, right? We have ways to manage, how we see people, but we certainly don't want to forget about Hitler. We try to uphold his memory in the sense that we need to remember that people like this can exist and have caused a lot of trouble. Anyway, so we had that argument in the summer, and I had used Nelson Mandela as a good example. I had said, well, look, see, he has some dirt on him. Well, I didn't say that actually, but I said that he, despite having been tyrannized over for many years and, sent to jail and all this kind of stuff for like 20 years, that even then, when he took power, he still allowed the whites of the country and the opposing side, if you will, to conserve their culture. Because he let them keep their team, for example. That was a big thing. Everybody was rallying around the rugby team, which were the Springboks, and so he kept the colors, he kept the team. He did everything he could to keep it inclusive, despite them having done a lot of shitty things. So that's real power. That's what I was trying to tell him. You don't take away culture in order to propagate a new idea. You have to add on to it. So Nelson Mandela added color to even the flag itself, right? He added culture, he added, and thereby came peace. So he didn't agree with that, and it's been months later. We haven't spoken since, and then out of nowhere, he sends me this video. It's an A+J video. You know how biased they are, and it's literally just slandering. Anyway, it's a platform that does political type videos and other stuff. But think of them as Vice, but almost like a soundbite kind of,
Like
just like
cross
more.
between BuzzFeed and Vice.
Yes, exactly, kind of like that. So they basically slander Nelson Mandela like from A to Z. They say none of the good things that he did is justified or has any grounding because he's done other horrible things. And it's like this outrage thing that's happening, right? Everybody's just trying to tear down whatever is good. We've had recently this Kevin Hart is not hosting the Oscars this year because they found some homophobic tweets from like 8 years ago. And it's like, guys, when can we, like, at what point does someone have to, kind of move on with their lives? At what point are they allowed to? You know what I mean? At what point is it okay? So just to wrap up the story real quick, he sends me a video about Nelson Mandela that's just slandering Mandela, and he doesn't say anything. And I'm like, dude, really? Like 4 or 5 months, you just had to say, oh, look, I found a piece of evidence that sort of like breaks down your argument.
That's awfully petty.
That's extremely petty. Yeah.
That's holding a grudge for that long. I don't know. It seems weird.
It's incredibly weird.
Like,
so
your opinions could have changed in that period of time.
Yeah, but the point is that that's number one. That's just a sort of manifestation of having that kind of ideology. You're holding that so intensely that a conversation that you had with a friend months ago, it still bothers you enough to, or at least is still in the background of your mind, to the point where if you see an information that helps you kind of like break them down, you're going to go and do that. Like, I don't know. It's really weird the way this is sort of like manifesting itself. So
and just to say, this isn't just you dealing with one situation. I see things like this here and there. It happens.
Okay, so can you give me some examples of how you've seen this manifest?
Well, just people keeping a grudge. Let's just say I hear all the time people in relationships, someone says something and then months later they say, hey, I never said that, and the person like practically has a recording of them. Not literally, but I mean, they it's like people hold on to things. They really do. And often that means something about the person who's holding on to something. Not to say that they're the only ones in the wrong, but just this kind of pettiness, it says something. It says something about people. Other examples, I don't really want to get into.
No, but I can see the point you're making. It's almost as if the person who's holding their ideology is also holding everything that comes into conflict with it at the same time. So if
it's
you,
like irking them in the back of their head forever because it's challenging their point of view.
Yeah,
so as soon as they find something that validates their point of view and, like, how do I say, buffers them from that thing that's been itching at them, then they are like, they jump on it. It's the echo chamber effect.
Exactly. And in fact, here's what I think it can segue into morality in a sense. But I think technically what happens is that they're so certain of their morality that it allows them to become rigid on their ideology. And so in order to stay rigid on the ideology, they need to continue proving anything that comes into discord wrong. And so this is a good segue again into what happened with this whole situation. And I think it's important to state before I move on that the reason why we want to talk about this is I think, those who are a little bit more, I mean, this sounds like the height of hypocrisy, but I do believe that we are in some sense enlightened. Those who, believe in free speech and the exchange of free-flowing ideas without censorship anyway. And so I want to say that, this whole podcast is really a testament to us trying to find out, how do we get past this? Because it's not just them versus us. This is our families. This is our friends. And, it's very hard to divorce, the idea from the person. If your family or if your friend is, possessing or is being possessed by an idea, let's not lie. You kind of hate their face in the moment, right? You're like, this is nuts. I don't like you right now. I don't feel like you're someone that I want to enjoy, in terms of a friend or a family. You're not, I don't want to be in your company. And that's how powerful ideas can be, right? They really fuck with our relationships. So, this is the case with this guy. And I'm like, man, this sucks. Cause I had some point I had looked up to him and all that kind of stuff, in different ways, but he I came to the point of telling him that I think that he's making an error when it comes to Hume's argument that you can't derive an ought from an is. Because we continued the debate after I told you about it, and I told him that, you know, what he seems to be doing, what people seem to be doing in this whole like polarization, both sides, left and right, but we can admit here that the left is a little bit more saturated with this kind
I
of.
just want to say that's just in the political sphere. There's all kinds of different polarizations happening in every field. Like I have my eye on the medical, the nutritional, and even medical and nutritional, they're different. There's polarization, extreme polarization everywhere.
Exactly. It applies to radical mentality. That's what it applies to. Not just, you know, who's on the left or who's on the right. It applies to extremist thinking. Mm-hmm. So we're just using that medium right now, which is the political spectrum, because that's where it seems to be relevant at the moment in time. But in the future, this very thing will still exist. It just might take a different form. Or at least, hopefully, it won't take a form on a mass scale like it is now. But the point is, you know, I think what the left is doing is they're saying that there's like a hierarchical structures, and those, the ruling class, if you will, you know, versus the disenfranchised. We need to equalize those things, right? We need to like make things better. And it's like, yes, we want to make things better. We want to restore some kind of balance. We don't want, you know, we know that power dynamics and hierarchies are, you know, at risk of tyranny, like Jordan Peterson claims quite a few, not claims, but states a few times during his talks.
Well, I mean, that's obvious.
It's obvious, exactly. We always
structures are built on legitimate foundations, usually. Well,
yes,
but they attract corruption. Obviously, people who just want power are going to be attracted to positions and power.
Exactly, and that's exactly where they go wrong, because you've just said it. Power dynamics and hierarchical structures, they're based on really solid factual ground, whereas these people don't believe that. They say, no, you can't derive an ought from an is. It's not in nature. Do you know what I mean? Or at least, so they'll do one of two things. They'll either say, you know, that's not true. Hierarchies are man-made. It's a human construct. Or they'll say it shouldn't be that way. Okay, so let's go with the option number 2 first, that it shouldn't be that way. You can't derive an ought from an is. Hume was right. Just because the natural world is a certain way, it doesn't mean that it should be a certain way, right?
There are hierarchies in nature, by the way. Just saying.
There are. That's what I'm saying. But that's a different class of radical mentality. What I'm going to deal with the first class, which is the argument that you can't derive an ought from an is. Again, morally speaking, you can't. There's no way to say, okay, you know, it's okay for people to abort their babies because it's factual that some babies come out fucked up, right? You know, there's no way to morally say, yeah, it's okay to abort the babies that come out fucked up, right? But there's factual ground in order to say, well, if you can abort the baby at a stage where it doesn't experience any consciousness or life, that then it becomes moral, right? At the end of the day, it's a debate. And I think it's a little bit murky. I kind of made it worse. But the point is, they want to derive an ought from an is, right? A lot of people want to do that. So okay. By symmetry of identity, what the left does is they say, well, you can't derive an ought from an is, therefore what is ought not to be. And by symmetry of identity, you know, just because it's a symmetry of identity, I think people feel like that's a virtuous thing. They feel, oh, okay, well, that's how we can be certain of our morality then. Whatever is should not be. So that's how the left, you know, really functions, right? The youth,
or whatever we feel is the ideal should be.
Exactly, right? Or and usually it's the exact opposite of whatever's happening, right? Whatever's on top, whatever's hierarchical. So, you know, it doesn't make sense though, because that causes a falsitical paradox, which means that if you try to change, you know, if you say, you know, what is should not be, then when you've achieved that, right, whatever will become should then also not be. Okay, and so Yuval Harari explains this very brilliantly in his book Homo Deus. Kind of plugging him, but I really think anybody who's hearing this should read it. But you know, he explains how religion, you know, kind of causes, you know, through time, religion has been a good example of how people destroy structures, they destroy and try to take down, hierarchies and stuff like that. But there are always other and even sometimes stronger hierarchies resurrected in their place. So there's no way to judge or gauge which one is better than the other, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a paradox. You're sort of like robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're, kind of, the Antifa is a great example of what I'm talking about, right? We're going to defeat fascism by being fascists ourselves, right? If we get there first, they won't be able to get there, but we're trying to fight I don't know, right? That's the point. I mean, you can't stamp out violence by using more violence. It doesn't work that way. That's number one. But number two, we have to deal with. I mean, what are we talking about when people say you can't derive a not from or a not from an is, therefore what? Do you know what I mean? Therefore, these people come up with what? Out of where?
Well, that's the problem. Is I feel like a lot of people haven't even thought that far through. How do you impose equalization in the first place? How do you impose equality? The only way you can do that is with a power structure. It's just confusing. It's self-refuting in that sense. You can't force people to be equal.
No.
Otherwise, you're forcing them, and then they're not equal to the ones who are forcing them. It's not. So this is why I think it's not a negation that's needed. It's an additive. You need to in order to restore better balance, you don't take away from one side, so as to increase the other, right? Because what does that do? Well, you see it just there in the balance. I mean, it makes a structure that's crazy, right? It doesn't work that way. If you take away from one side, the other side will go up, and then you'll have an oppressed minority somewhere. So, like I said, I think you need to, if there's if there's something that's not balanced, you need to add to balance things out. So it's kind of like, use probiotics. Let's use your industry, right? I mean, if you have candida overgrowth, which is a bacteria that's not bad, but becomes bad if there's too much of it in your gut, right? Well, what do you do? Gut microbiome is a great example for society.
But it is, right? I mean, but what do? You eat probiotics. You don't try to extract the candida. How would you anyway, right? What you do?
I wouldn't always agree with that, but
but
for the sake of example.
But obviously, what seems to be more important is to add the good bacteria that's lacking, right? To make things more proportionate. Because how do you
get rid of the fuel for the bad ones?
Exactly, but getting rid of the fuel for the bad ones isn't the same thing as getting rid of the bad ones, okay? Because it's not about good and bad. That's what I'm trying to say. It's about balance.
Well, here, all to say, in every possible manifestation in life, there is good and bad. So if you see the upper class and lower class, you can't say one is good, one is bad. I think that's ridiculous. They both have upsides. They both have their roles and downsides. And if everyone is taught how to recognize what their places are and where the downfalls can come, then we can navigate properly. It's simple as that. It's like, for example, the upper class, as you say, with the hierarchies, it is often based off of people getting results. Even if people in power are, say, evil or something, they still want to find the people who can do the work well for them, right? So they'll use, you could say, people who can get results. Or you'll have smart people who are reasonable and are just looking for people who can get results. But at the same time, those hierarchies can attract people who are just in there for the power and the influence and are very selfish. So you see both of these sides. The hierarchies encourage good work, but they can go sour. Then the lower class, they're the ones who are living life. They're producing. They're the base. And it's the same thing. It's basically the same thing. This evil can come from the bottom, and what it'll do is it'll convince everyone that the top is evil, completely evil, and has no benefits. And then they just take down the top, and then they have no structure anymore, and it falls apart. So
it's a strange thing. It's almost like if people understood that, and it's really odd because Karl Marx explained that to some degree as well. So he
It's
even
funny how
kind
much
of,
people have taken his ideas into different directions.
it's wild. But so it's kind of like, if people, you would think that if people knew that information, they would put down their ridiculous mentalities of like, oh, we need to you know, just tear down whoever's at the top. It's like, well, no, because whoever's going to be at the top, then you're going to want to tear down. It's like so destructive. It's almost like, and I'm going to get fucking hounded for this, but it's almost like the left right now is acting like the HIV to our AIDS. It's like a it's like an immune system like kind of problem, right? It's like it's attacking itself. It's self-destructive. Um, anyway, but you know, it's not about left and right. And so, okay, here's a new piece of information. I've been listening to a podcast called Think Again. It's a derivative of the show Big Think. That's like a YouTube kind of show where they bring on like, you know, public intellectuals and scientists, philosophers, artists, that kind of stuff, and they just talk from anywhere between 2 and 15 minutes. Anyway, people should go and see that stuff. It's really interesting. Anyway, Jason Gott's the guy who hosts the show. Yeah, he hosts the podcast. He's super, really, you know, he's a great journalist. I think he's good at what he does in terms of interviewing people. And it's not the same as being a journalist, but I think journalism should return a little bit to the interview style that people like Jason Gotts and Mark Rubin and these other great interviewers seem to be doing. I think journalism has to return to that kind of inquisition in a sense, because the way that journalists are inquiring nowadays is it's kind of like Kathy Newman, right? The British journalist. She's not inquiring for knowledge or for enlightenment as to what's going on. She's inquiring in the same kind of style of the Inquisition of the Catholic Church, right? We want to, you know, is this girl a witch? And but then yeah, you're stating it's an inquisition.
You got 2 ears, 1 mouth, guys. That's
exactly. So anyway, this guy, he's so cool because he'll actually, I sent him an email. He actually responds to his emails and stuff, which is really cool. He keeps in contact with people that listen to his show. And I asked him if he was going to do a show about the intellectual dark web, and it struck me as surprising because he's not. He thinks that it's a thing of tribalism in itself, the intellectual dark web. Okay. So his mentality is more left of center. He's definitely, you know, he was talking to, I think, Jennifer Doudna about gender, and I think he supports, you know, what we see as compelled speech laws. I think he supports that. I think he thinks that society should abandon all traditional ideas of gender and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, but I don't want to make too much because his political views aren't clear to me. But I'm just saying, you know, he definitely thinks that the intellectual dark web is too rigid and they all seem to be conservative. And I'm not certain that he's actually kind of listened to the intellectual dark web stuff enough to really understand that it's really just a platform where people from all over the spectrum are free-flowing ideas.
There's a lot of diversity of thought there.
Yeah, but it's strange because so he seems to have some mentality that's kind of rigid ideology in the sense that we don't want to accept any tribe or any group that doesn't accept gender as it being integrated in society. This whole new gender type stuff. So he's rigid on that, and then he sees them as being rigid. So it's like two sides looking at each other as rigid. And it's like, well, you know, at the end of the day, if the two sides aren't listening to each other, then you're both rigid, right? So in a sense, he also kind of made me think, yeah, I do see potential for the intellectual dark web to be tribalism in itself. I mean, you can't escape tribalism at some level.
That exists everywhere.
It exists everywhere, but I think that
if you're a bunch of people who thinks that those guys are tribal, then you're tribal.
Yeah, you're tribal, exactly. But I think there is danger. You do see tribes sort of forming around the intellectual dark web. You got these like crazy conservative cats who are like, you know, getting together and just trying to be tribal, right? That you can see that. So, but I know that the main sort of group in the center. You got Sam Harris, Eric Weinstein. These guys obviously aren't tribalistic. So, but I'm just being worried. He made me think, yeah, I got to watch out. I don't want to fall prey to the tribalism. But I was surprised by his mentality. It really struck me there. I was like, wow, that's strange, because you're so inquisitive, you're so open-minded, you're very free, he's very genuine. But then he disregards the intellectual dark web, and it's like, dude, this is a movement. It's a big movement right now, and you just don't want to look into it. It's like, because you're in support of another movement that comes into conflict with that movement. I mean, is that really being a good, interviewer? I don't know, man. It's a strange mentality and this guy is super open-minded. Like, that's what I'm saying. It's like, even someone who's got like a good sense making apparatus, as far as I can tell, objectively speaking, he's quite objective. How can on one subject, which seems to be these gender wars type thing, this is how it's all kind of being sparked. It always comes back down to the differences between men and women, and it's like, fuck, guys, it seems so trivial to me. But anyway,
so a big part of what you're saying right now is not that he's necessarily wrong. It's just that he's taking things a little bit superficially when it comes to the intellectual dark web, and you're surprised, as am I, that someone who is generally smart and open can act like that out of the blue.
Yeah, yeah.
Like for me, it's, if I was in his place, I personally would have said, well, I don't know much about it. I'll have to check it out if I have the time. Yeah. I wouldn't jump on a thought. I guess as you said, he associates it probably with Jordan Peterson, who's associated with the dark web and all that.
Yeah.
And they're like, they're portrayed as anti new gender roles.
But they're not even discussing the issue that much anymore anyway, because that's never been the issue anyway. Like, Jordan Peterson had the issue with compelled speech, but it's just, I want to make it clear that he's not, I don't equate him as being those radical leftists at all. And it just goes to show you, though, that, an idea, one specific idea can make you rigid. So like, I tried to be objective to the point where at least I admit that I'm being rigid. I'd be like, yeah, look, this is just the way I see it. I can't see it any other way. But I'm saying that I'm very subjective on that point. I'm not saying that my point of view is objective. The only time I'll be objective in this, or claim objectivity, will be, and which is similar to like objectivity aligned with my subjectivity. It's like, well, this is my opinion, but it's also factual. The only time I'll do that is when we're talking about facts, like science. So like gender, if we want to talk about that real quick, it's factual. I mean, on some level, yes, there's a kind of a human construct that kind of maps on top of reality. It's called your consciousness. It's called subjective reality, right? So yes, on some degree, gender is a construct. Nobody said that pink, is a female color and blue a male color. There are certain reasons that you can boil down to why we're attracted to different things because of differences between men and women. But the point is, one person acting in a specific way versus the way someone is supposed to act are two different things. And so part of it is human construct, part of it is biology, part of it is, physics. There's
a lot of layers to it. You can't just call it gender and throw it all in the same bag.
Exactly, right? So I think we're even agreeing with a lot of these new gender ideas, is that, yes, gender isn't...
If you want to be a girly boy, all the power to you, man.
Or a boyish girl. It doesn't matter. The point is, gender exists in terms of, biology. We know that there's a difference between men and women, when it comes to, well, self-evidence. I mean, different anatomy, chromosomes, different abilities, different, you know what I mean? But nobody wants difference. We want equal. So
a lot of people on the left will ridicule creationists and then not really account for a lot of the facts of evolution, such as how gender has adapted into roles, evolutionary roles, for millions of years. And I see this with the vegans too. They say, yeah, well, we've been eating meat for millions of years, doesn't mean it's what's best for us. And you're like, and then if you try to argue against that, they'll be like, you're appealing to nature. Just because it's natural doesn't mean it's fact. But it's like, do you believe in evolution.
Do you believe in it? You don't even know. Exactly. Do you know what? You're pointing into something that's really funny and kind of strange. But
Yeah.
we get this idea that conservatives are anti-science and liberals are full on science, at least classically.
It's a total spectrum.
But here's the thing. Liberalism does rely on science. I mean, to make progress is to use science on some level. And this is why liberalism has always been synonymous with science. But you have to in order to support a radical ideology, you will at some point have to deny facts. Therefore, bye-bye science, you're out the window. I don't give a fuck what you say. And this is what the left has done. They've become so progressive that they've become regressive. Do you know what I mean? It's like they've done the full circle. It's kind of like, okay, we do believe in science and all this stuff and evolution, but when it comes to self-expression, we have to justify it by the fact that there is no gender. So they create their own fact. They say, well, forget the traditional facts. We come up with our own facts now. You know what I mean? Fuck consensus, fuck science and all this kind of stuff. But it's like, great, you can fuck consensus and you can fuck science to some degree, but to do it to the level where you literally have to say, yeah, no, this guy having a penis and this person having a vagina doesn't make them any different. I mean, come on. I mean, there's some kind of consensus somewhere that we have to come to an agreement on so that we can navigate reality. And this is why it's become a politically correct issue, because if you're going to start changing facts, you're going to start changing definitions. Well, then you're talking about language, and then language becomes, not only really strict and kind of compelled and censored, but it also becomes confusing and retarded. And it just gets worse and worse. And I kind of liken it to Robespierre, Maximilien Robespierre. He led the French Revolution, right? The French Revolution, people were fucking tired of it. They're like, fuck all this. The rich have made us suffer enough. We can't even buy bread anymore, blah, blah, blah. So everybody, it all erupted, right? So Robespierre took that sort of power, that erratic kind of political, just energy, and he said, oh, I can harness this and use it for my own means and my own power. And he literally erected some kind of weird religion that went alongside the sort of political structure that he was trying to create near the end, when it started sort of slowing down, and and they had killed already like thousands and thousands of people. Well, that's the problem with that kind of radical ideology, is that the people who propagate it end up having their heads on the block when it starts to slow down. So like Robespierre got guillotined. He got, the people killed him because he took power at the top, because he became the very thing that he was fighting against. And so it's just, who's next in line, baby? Who's next in line? And these people that are like causing distress and like causing people their lives, their jobs, their what I mean, just tearing them down like they did to Kevin Hart, like they do to thousands of different people. They're going to be the ones who are going to get fucked. Just think about when everybody sort of regains their sanity a little bit, when we kind of recalibrated everything. Who do you think is going to stand out then, right? Nobody's going to, I'm going to be looking at the guy next to me who was that fucking asshole leftist virtue signaling twat, and I'm going to be like, yeah, man, yeah, no, I don't think I want to do business with you, man. Yeah, no, peace out, bro. Do you know what I mean? That's the way it's going to be.
Yeah. When all is said and done, what's next?
Anyway, strange mentality. I don't know. It's just, so I haven't really come up to a solution yet. I want to know, like, I know that was kind of like depressing, because that's no. But it seems to be where we are right now. But what I learned from you, Oliver, is as I learned that through skepticism and through humility that you gain by being skeptical. And this is why I love Matt Dillahunty, but because he seems to be genuine, and he's a true skeptic, to the point where he's always checking himself. Always, you know what I mean? There's some things, of course, that he'll jump on and he'll be like, no, this is what I believe. But the things that he protects so, I'm trying to think of a good word. Viscerally, exactly. So viscerally, the things that he'll protect are the very things that allows him to continue being open-minded and to keep a clean mentality, so that it doesn't get possessed by any ideas that are in any way, shape, or form negative. So this is something that I've noticed in you, and I think you've opened that up in me in general. And I mean, that's obviously one of the reasons we're friends now. But you know, how would you, in my position, kind of, not with this guy, I've cut him out of my life, unfortunately, but you know, it's not worth it. I think I have to talk to you about that later as to what I think the solution is ultimately. But how do you at least deal with someone that you can't cut out of your life, and that they hold an idea like that? How do you deal with that?
What do you mean I can't cut them out of my life?
Well, say it's your mom, right? Like, you're not going to cut your mom out of your life just because she's holding some you know, radical ideology in her head. You know, you're gonna have to deal with that ideology time and time again, once in a while, in different ways. It's gonna come up at some point. So how do you deal with it? What do you do?
Well, there's a few things. If you really can't deal with it, okay, it depends, because you have to get specific. Some ideologies are straight up, they don't work. They don't fit together. I think most people are pretty centered in the sense that they have ideologies that can fit most people in. Like, even they can even kind of agree to disagree with a lot of people. But then it's when you get to the point where you can't agree to disagree. Those are extreme cases, right?
Yeah, when you disagree to agree to disagree. Like that's something that seems to be happening with this radicalism. So what do you do in that scenario, right?
I hate to say it, but that's all at war, man. Like, you can't just live that way. That's what's encroaching little by little. I haven't had to deal with that in my real day-to-day life because I keep a pretty tight circle of people. I've been pretty selective for many, many years at this point, who I let take a lot of my time.
But isn't that strange? It's kind of like we have to force you to be open-minded. Like, how do you do that? It's so. I mean, is that something that you can do? Is that even possible? It's like war. Let's go to war over this. You know.
You're cutting out a bit.
Sorry, but what I was just asking, if it cut out there, is that isn't it paradoxical? Like, if it's all out war, how do you go to war against someone in order to make them open-minded? How do you say, okay, well, you know, we're going to fight for you to be open-minded. You have to be open-minded. Like, how do you do that? How do you know what I mean?
Well, for coming from my perspective, I'm never going to be the first one to make a move. I'm always going to be the one focusing on what I consider to be right, and what I consider to be right is almost never attacking anyone. So I'm going to be living by my example, and based off of the way I live, what I go for is things that get results. So either people see that I'm getting results and they'll change their mind and they'll be interested in what I'm doing, or they'll be completely closed off and they're going to attack me for what I'm doing. In that case, then it's self-defense, and I have to fight back. There's not much you can do. It really does get to the point where if you can't reason with one another, the only next step is physical violence. That's what we're seeing now. And there are groups now that are saying, you can't reason with these other people, so now we have to step in with violence. I've seen someone, I saw a friend of mine who I consider to be pretty smart post an article on Facebook. It was maybe a year ago, but about how the taboo against violence should be taken down because sometimes you just can't reason with Nazis, you know?
Yeah, but
that's the problem, though.
I'm sure that some leftist sort of, you know, person right now listening to this would have their sphincter like tighten up real fucking bad because, you know, they hear you saying, "Oh yeah, well, violence is necessary at some point," and it's like I'm guarantee you this would be the reaction. No, it's not, and you're a fascist. Blah 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 blah. Now go punch that Nazi in the face. Do you know what I mean? It's so strange because you're right.
Exactly.
It's what I just want people to understand. You're not advocating for violence. What you're saying is that the reality that we occupy, and this is where I don't usually use this term because I'm actually not conservative, right? typically speaking, I'm classically liberal, but is like they're real fucking snowflakes, and they need to learn, be like, this is the reality we occupy. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Some things just are, right? Some things just,
Yep.
it's like, grow up,
At least
princess.
for now.
At least for now, exactly. And we're
You
trying
have to work with them if they like. Maybe some of those things that are factual can change, but you have to work with them for at least for the moment and learn as much as you can about what factual reality is before any of it can change.
Exactly. It's a progressive thing, progress, not regress. So, just to tie that off, it's great that you say that you kind of bring that into light. It's like, look, guys, when we've defined what open-minded is, right? Across all spectrums, it has nothing to do with an idea. It has to do with allowing ideas to exchange. If that open-mindedness doesn't sort of manifest itself on one of either side or all sides, then it really does collapse down to violence. It's just the way it is, and you have no choice.
Yes, exactly. So once again, I'm going to fall back on my example of my health, right? Yeah. So I deal with vegans, and they're loosening up a bit, it seems, these days at least. Probably another wave is going to come by soon, but I can't eat plant foods. This might sound crazy, and I know there's no context for this right now. I might have to do an episode just about this shit, but I literally have physical reactions, and this is proven. I have tests and everything done to basically all plant food, so I have to eat meat. So it brings up a lot of criticism from militant vegans saying, well, no, we don't want anyone to eat meat. You can't eat meat. That's just bad. So you're basically telling me I'm bad. Okay, that's fine. In your opinion, I'm bad. But then when it gets to the point of them being like, no, we have to act on this. We have to make it illegal to consume meat. And believe me, you don't have to believe me, but just look it up. There are people really, really pushing for this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And at least taxing meat. Then taxing meat is becoming a big issue. Anyways, you get to the point where you're threatening my very existence because I am dependent off of animal products.
Yeah, and that's violence.
At a certain point, I have no choice but to fight back.
Yeah, of course.
I'm going to keep trying to reason with you for forever, but then if you actually get to the point, and I've given you all the reasons in the world, and I'm starving there, I'm gonna have to do something. Yeah, I have no choice.
You're gonna have to go and chop up their dog and just eat it raw right in front of them. No, but I think that you've exposed another kind of axiom, and it kind of goes back to that Hume thing that you can't derive an ought from an is. But the moment that they've inverted it and they've said, okay, well, therefore, what is ought not to be, they've claimed for themselves absolute morality. They've claimed for themselves certainty of their morality.
That's a dangerous game. That's a very dangerous game.
Because then it allows them to do whatever they want. And this is what everybody does on some level, right? It's just that this is the new religion, and this is how the new religion is justified. We don't realize it, but religion has nothing to do with what we traditionally see in terms of church, mosque, whatever. Religion is a system of stories. It's kind of like an axiomatic vehicle. Okay, that doesn't really make sense. It's a vehicle, however, between how we form societies and how we can keep the cohesion between the societies, because society forming is in itself kind of a very violent process in a sense. To form civilization, the formation of it, the growth and the interconnections that happen with societies, it's like a growth pangs for someone who's growing, like a child that's growing, right? And so but in order to sort of let's say quell the growth pangs, in order to keep things stable throughout the growth of society, you have something like religion. And religion is a sort of Yuval Harari kind of explains it in terms of stories, right? We have stories that we tell each other that where we can bring down morality that justifies our actions, and therefore we can change reality. And it's very true. It's kind of like he uses the example of the god Sobek, which is, I guess, an crocodile in the Nile during the Egyptian sort of era. And, because they prayed to the god Sobek, they believed that they would have the ability to create this big lake that allowed for them to grow crops and all this kind of stuff. I forget what the lake was called anyway. But the point is, because millions of people were sort of like, they had a story that brought cohesion between them. It allowed them to cooperate, because it was justified from above, from something that was superhuman. It allowed them to change the actual reality of their lives, right? They had nothing. They lived in the desert before, and then they came together and suffered to build something that brought them, kind of prosperance. And so, everybody does this. Everybody tries to find some absolute truth that they can believe in that will justify their sense of morality. And the new religion of today that allows them to do it is that justifies their actions, which would be the actions of like Antifa and all this kind of stuff, is that very notion, is the inversion of Hume's is from a not idea.
Something I just want to say about that I think I see a lot is, yes, we all have this absolute ideal, but we're not always aware of it. I like to say we're all philosophers, but we don't either you're conscious of it or you're not. If you're not conscious of it, then you have some kind of philosophy that's leading your mind, that's leading your life.
Yeah. And
what I see a lot is people who don't engage with thinking about things or like questioning their own ideas or the ideas of those around them. They tend to fall back on the idea that there is no morality deep down. Basically, the idea is we're all just pink monkeys trying to survive and get pleasure while we can, right? So on the surface, they see it this way. On the surface, you talk about being nice, but that's just playing the survival game, right? It's this exchange of like, if I'm nice to this person, they have resources. They might give me some resources, or they might get me in a good place in society. And it's this constant game. And I'm not saying that people are like completely like this, but there is almost like a little voice way in the back of their head. And we all have it. I have it too. Everyone has it. But this very animalistic side of us that sees things that way. And if you want to argue that that's the way things are, then come debate me. I'd love to debate that. But I genuinely don't think that that's how the universe works. It might be an aspect of it. But just to think that so many people might deep down sort of see things that way. Well, of course, you're going to see what's going on in the world today. A lot of logical fallacies, think like belief systems that hold different beliefs that don't actually logically make sense together.
Cognitive dissonance.
They're just picking and choosing to get where they want to go.
Yeah. Cognitive dissonance. I just wanted to use that term to wrap it up. Yeah. That cognitive dissonance is it's an interesting one. I think it's something that I think it's the main word to describe the problem that we have with in humanity is that we have to get through our own cognitive dissonances to all come together and be cohesive on another level, on a level that's not animalistic, like you said, that has more to do with a morality that's handed down from some kind of authority, but isn't necessarily extrapolated from an authority that can be interpreted in different ways. And that's what's so difficult. It's like, how do you, some people say rationality is the authority, logic, all this kind of stuff, but logic and rationality breaks down when you apply it to very irrational beings, which is us in a sense. We're irrational in nature in terms of emotion. We didn't evolve in order to to be completely efficient in that sense and to live by the laws of logic. If we had, then we would be in a different world, but we're not. And I think that's what the movie Lucy.
Boring world, honestly.
Yeah, but the point is we can get pretty far, but at some point to be too logical, it doesn't help. I mean, it doesn't do anything. It's kind of like saying, okay, if you're completely logical, then you're going to erase all emotion. But then if you erase all emotion, you have no reason to live. It's like, okay, so you're now that you're more logical, like extremely logical, you're more efficient, you're more successful, you have all these things. But then what? What are those things for? Are they providing you with some feel good? No, they're not providing you with something feel good because you're more logical, you're not feeling. And so it's kind of like that Star Trek gives you a good example of that, right? That's what one of the main kind of themes of the story that kind of reflects humanity's beauty is the contrast between Captain Kirk and the Vulcan guy, right? Whatever his name is. I'm not a Trekkie fan, but I knew that much about it. So logic breaks down to some degree. So nothing can be an absolute authority in the way that we would like, but we try to find some kind of amalgamation of all the authorities that seem to make sense: rationality, logic, science, facts, human emotion, art, you know what I mean? Even just your ideas, where you're coming from, your experiences, and everybody's. We try to find balance. Balance seems to be the authority that the only thing that we can point at in terms of a unified theory. Balance, right? The Buddha was right in that sense. I mean, he was so right, in fact, that it's resumed in one saying that the Buddhists say. They say, if you meet Buddha on the road, kill him. It don't establish an absolute truth or an absolute morality, because if you do, then you've begun to slide down the road again, where in a negative space. So mentality wise, I think that reflects the opposite of what these people seem to be enchained in.
Just I know this is a little esoteric, but just an example is think of a human body. We're mostly built on bones, but it's not just one bone stuck together that makes us mobile. We have all kinds of soft tissues. We're changing a lot. We can move in all kinds of fluid ways. It's just think about it as kind of a good symbol.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I said this in my email to Jason. Actually, he asks people if it's okay to disclose the things they said in their emails, and I kind of didn't ask him if I could talk about this, but I mean, this podcast isn't that big, and I think he would respect that, that I would be able to talk about this. But the point is that he, I mentioned it to him that I think there's a manifold of truths. There's, that's out there, and that's what we need to look at. It's kind of like, I believe that, going back to the gender thing, it is the end of gender. The gender wars will result in the end of gender in some way, shape, or form. I'm not, but if this is coming in from a different place, which is the future for me, but if you think about it, whether it's virtual reality or complete control of this reality, we're obviously, increasing our capabilities. And with capability and possibility comes a necessity to restructure our morality. Okay, that's a lot of rhyming there, but the point is that because we are sort of becoming gods in one sense or another, because we're having all these possibilities, we try to restructure how we think of ourselves. And so you can do that by saying, well, I don't have gender, and therefore, great. But you can't say that right now. In the future, it's possible. Maybe you're going to live in your virtual world and you won't have a gender, or you will have a gender of some sort of weird amalgamation of ideas. Whatever it is, it's clear that the ideas the idea of gender kind of collapses. It doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about gender if there can be, a 76th type, that has no attributes that have anything to do with any
76?
Whatever it is, I don't know. But the point is, if it has no attributes that can be attached to human biology, then what is gender? Gender doesn't exist, and okay, that's fine by you. But it's not the reality that we inhabit right now. We have a sort of system of definitions that allows us to navigate reality, right? And so I think those are two truths on the manifold of truths that you have to look at and say, oh, okay, so there's some truth to the gender thing, is that technically, yeah, I mean, there is a human construct element to it, but also there is a factual real sort of like matter, basis for gender as well. So it's kind of like, well, they're both true in some way, shape, or form. To the degree, that's where the debates start happening, and then the fights and all that stuff. But it doesn't matter.
All we need is clarification.
Clarification.
It's we should be asking more questions instead of talking more.
Exactly, and that's why philosophy is so fucking necessary. Questions, because, and I was explaining this to Jordan today, is that, you know, what I'm after. She asked me very kind of prophetically, like it sounded like it was very much like a movie moment. But she's like, James, what are you after? And I was like, yeah, this is an interesting question, because I talk like a motherfucker, as is self-evident for whoever's listening to this right now. And I'm like, well, what I'm after is the questions that have not yet been conceived of, not the answers. I'm never after an answer. So that's, I think, the job of a philosopher is you know, that idea of trying to clarify things and to have some thought, and to use philosophy to, you know, to have a better mentality, and to you know, look for truth. That idea is very novel, because you're not looking for an answer, you're looking for questions, and thereby you start to create a spectrum of truths, as opposed to just one single truth that could be interpreted in different ways. And so I had explained that through the Zarathustra example. So I had given her this little example just a few minutes beforehand, that Zarathustra came down from the mountain. This is Nietzsche's, you know, kind of a book for anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about. But in this book, this sort of prophet, Zarathustra, comes down, and then he sees this group of people huddled around a tiny, tiny little man, but he had a huge ear. And the people were very like infatuated with this. They were like, wow, they were impressed. But Zarathustra tried to point out that he was, you know, impressive, yes, but he also had a lot to work on, and that this isn't something that you should be impressed about. In fact, it might even be something that you have to look on with pity, because he saw hyper specialization as a deformity. Okay, Jordan Peterson really explained that well. It's basically paraphrasing him, but he saw hyper specialization as a deformity. So this little guy had an immense talent, whatever that ear represented, like talent, but at the same time, look at the rest of him, right? He's incredibly small. He's lacking in other ways, and that represents human beauty. Humans aren't meant for just one ideology, one idea, or one talent, or one use. You know, yeah. We have this ability to diversify in different ways and hold them all together. And so, if you're a philosopher, you don't hyper specialize in any one field. Like, you don't even specialize in one field technically. You know, like a scientist, you know, a neuroscientist like Sam Harris has some philosophical authority on that front, because he's on that front of that science. But ultimately speaking, philosophy is something that is at the root of all sciences, and in fact, it was the beginning of all science, right?
You talk about the scientific. It's funny when Neil deGrasse Tyson says we can throw out philosophy because we have science now, but
Lawrence Krauss as well. That's bullshit. Because
because the scientific method itself is based off of a logical,
yeah.
And logic itself is a whole intense philosophical conversation that most people have never had, and is still debated on in many parts, and yet people are like, well, it's logical.
Yeah, they throw it in the bin of science. Oh yeah, that's a part of a science, logic, right? It's like, no, that has nothing to do with science. It has to do with the root of science. It has to do with how science manifests itself, right? Like natural philosophers back in the day, they had to think before they could discover, you know, their environment. They couldn't just look at the environment and be like, wow, look at that, that's made out of atoms. No, they had to think, what is that made of? That question, that philosophical, that need for wisdom, that love of wisdom, right?
That's the foundation of natural
that's
philosophy.
the foundation.
You try things and you see what happens.
Yeah, that's science. That's science, and on some, but in order for science to happen, you need to think about it. You need to think about questions. It's like, I wonder what would happen if we do this with this. You know what I mean? This is how science happens. It's very philosophical in nature, and so. And so what I like in philosophy to be, when it comes to what I'm after, is that I don't specialize in like pure philosophy. If I don't go and do science experiments for myself, or I don't go and look into the evolutionary biology and what's going on there. I don't look into quantum physics in terms of being a specialist in those. Instead, I kind of follow Zarathustra, and I try to learn what I can about all of those, right? So I will use the information at hand. Like, okay, so these people are specialized in these areas, and I'm going to take that knowledge and I'm going to try to create a sort of a collage of all of these sort of truths from these different vantage points. Okay, well, from the vantage point of neuroscience, that you're getting an idea of what consciousness is from that level. Then you can go up into the psyche. So you go into psychology. So you take the specialists of psychology and you get their vantage point. And so you accumulate all these truths and you connect the dots, and then you kind of create yourself. I want to create new questions based on those vantage points, right? See, this is why historians are so interesting, is because they do that in a sense as well. They're very philosophical. They take the specializations of and the facts, and they do the same thing in a different way. They don't take just what's at hand today. What's the new information? What are the consensus between all these sort of sciences and philosophies? And how can we go into the future? They look into the past and they say, okay, well, here's what's happened over the past, and here's how it applies to today, and here's how it could continue into the future. And this is what philosophy does, from a vantage point that's the most ecumenical. The historian does it, in a sense. I think philosophy it doesn't just take into account today's findings and today's facts and today's ideas. It takes the historic ideas as well, and it looks at it from an ecumenical perspective. It's like, okay, so now we see what history has given us, we see what science has given us, we see what technology has given us, and so and we've seen what philosophy has given us in the past as well. So what questions are pertinent going into the future that nobody has conceived of yet once I've connected all those dots? So philosophy to me it's incredibly difficult. It's the most challenging, because you have to learn about all of these things and how they interrelate. It's a very noble, and I think this is why I love philosophy. This is what I love to do. And I think it's very important. I think that's why in everybody, the authority is the philosopher in that person. That's the real authority.
Philosophy is also the angle that you come at. It's the lens that you're looking at everything from. Like, there's the wave of postmodernism now, and it gets down to it's funny because they're actually addressing questions that people like Neil deGrasse Tyson are completely avoiding, which need to be asked in the first place. So it's like, well, you need a logical method to do science, right?
Yeah, but can you explain postmodernism just for those who are listening?
Okay, well, for the most part, it's just the idea that there's no truth. There's no such thing as truth. Like, just because this substance is flammable now doesn't mean it will be in 3 minutes from now, because there's infinite variable factors that make it what it is now, and one of those could switch at any point. And it's all relative, and you can't really know anything, so just give up on trying to figure anything out. That's my take at this moment. But it's funny because I see value there. I also see a lot of stupidity personally, but
Depends on what level. Again, there's manifold truths to everything. To some degree, it's applicable, that the idea that truth isn't rooted in authority. Yes, there are no absolute truths in the way we like to think about absolute truths, but maybe there is an absolute truth. You can't rule that out either, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so all to say is, at that point, if you're a scientist who's throwing out philosophy, then you're not actually thinking about how any of this makes sense. So let's just say you're a really basic bitch scientist, and you're building a baking soda and vinegar volcano, right? And to you, it's like, okay, this is science that if you put baking soda and vinegar together, it makes the fucking volcano erupt, right? Well, guess what? There's a shit ton of philosophical presuppositions there. It's the idea that, okay, well, is there such thing as truth? Is there reproducibility? Is there consistency? These are all enormous conversations.
Yeah, just because the volcano can erupt when you do that sequence of adding the vinegar with the baking soda, does that mean it'll reproduce itself tomorrow? I mean, you can just say, of course, because it's reproduced itself in the past, but there's nothing that you can be certain of going into the future without philosophically questioning it first. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just funny to me that the postmodernists are taking a stance in that field. Mm-hmm. Without actual but then they also, it's funny because I see a lot of like radical leftists or postmodernists and moral relativists who think that there's no purpose and there's no meaning and there's no truth, and then they quote science a lot, and then they throw science again. It's that picking and choosing aspect of the animalistic side of things. But what was I getting at?
Well, we were trying to.
Oh yeah, say. I think to talk about what you were saying, how philosophy is kind of like looking back at all these things. Well, that's it. Everything you do, every information that you take in, is going to be filtered through your philosophical glasses, if you know they're there or not. And so basically, the way I'm seeing the world right now is that there's a philosophical war going on at a very, very deep level behind every one of these topics. It's like there's no gender, there is gender, one extreme versus the other. For example, well, what is at the root of those is there's no truth. We can do whatever we want. We're animals and nothing matters. And you can't limit me to any kind of social role, versus no control, social role. This is the fact. This is reality. It's truth versus not truth.
No, but I think it's a return to the main problem of consciousness, epistemology, truth. These sort of big concepts that we've kind of. It always goes back down to those problems, and it always will be a problem in a sense. But I think when it comes to truth, again, earlier tonight I used this example that if you understand that there is objective truth and subjective truth, you're starting in a better place than just being subjective. I think we can agree on the basis of that being a rational thing. If you understand rationality. So it would presuppose that you need to understand the value of logic and rationality. But the point is, it's better to understand and acknowledge the existence of both, subjective and objective. And this is where existentialism really came in to do some wonders. It's that it explains how, there is going to be this misalignment between truths. Your truth is not the same as my truth. If we use it in the most basic example, I could tell you that we're looking at the same object right now. You see I love the hat, by the way. Yeah, it looks good.
No, but that's the object, right?
Oh, yeah, okay, so let's say I'm looking at your hat, right? Yeah. Now, I look at it as being an object that is black. You could be looking.
I'm not smiling looking at it. Sorry.
Yeah, you could look at this same object and say, yes, it's also black. But the very word itself, black, only represents what we have come to agree upon as being the objective truth. We say this is what black is, but in actuality, what you could be seeing right now is something completely different than what I am. There's no way to know that, and to realize that is to understand the subjectivity of our own minds. And so
you're not saying that this applies to all things.
No, I'm not saying it applies to all things. But what I'm saying is that it's an acknowledgement that there is an objective reality and there's a subjective reality. And once you've thrown those two into chaos is the moment that you're going to argue about factual truths. Because the fact is based on objective reality. And if we all subjectively agree that there is an objective reality, then we can all establish a basis, which would be facts. We can establish a basis for truth. So this basis for truth is just that, though, a basis. It's not absolute truth. We can say that, yes, gravity exists. You know, you're sitting in your chair right now and I'm sitting on my couch because gravity exists and it has a force and it exerts itself exteriorly onto us, whatever it is, where we can clearly define that is an objective fact that we agree on. That's how we make consensus. But if you start throwing things around like, yeah, well, you know, maybe, well, I don't know what these people are doing, to be honest, but if you confuse objective reality with subjective reality, then you're going to confuse, you're going to eliminate any
social construct.
There you go. That's a perfect example. You know, gender is a social construct. Well, then you've completely disregarded and negated all consensus, all basis for truth. So it's like, okay, so it's a social construct. Then, you know, what are you? And what do you know what they come up with? They say just this, just a person, just a human being. So you're regressive. You've eliminated any specificity for your own sort of I don't know, for your own, basically just for your own point system, just to win. It's like, okay, great. So what happens if we all acknowledge that all gender, there's no differences, all that? We go towards what you're saying, towards your truth, right? At some point, where is that argument going to turn into? That you're not human? It's like, yeah, I'm just an entity. I'm an entity like everybody else. Everybody else is an entity as well.
I am just life.
I am just life. Yeah, exactly. Where does it stop? And like, how do we navigate? How do we talk about things? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. I'm surprised I haven't said this on the show yet, but one distinction I love to make is, you know, we have borders and limitations in our body because it's good to not have your shit mixed with your blood. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why we live on the crust of the planet and not in the magma.
Yeah. There's an order to things. I like that. We should make that into a t-shirt. There's a reason for why your blood doesn't mix with your shit.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying that that's comparable to borders and countries, but they're like countries often, for example, and cultures are formed not only because it's often because people have different ideologies, but often it's just that they have different cycles of nature that they're connected to. And a big reason why now everyone's talking about diversity, but we're destroying cultures. We're basically like every ancient culture, like one of my favorite, the Maasai, their entire culture is destroyed now by philanthropic companies that keep talking about how we're going to make their lives better, but then they just take their way of life away.
Yeah, it's kind of like intersectionality. That's the biggest bullshit in the world. I'm sorry to say, people. And again, it's because they're upholding this idea that they're virtuous, that they're like, anybody who attacks my idea of feminist intersectionality is a bigot and a racist. It's like, shut the fuck up for a second, listen to me, and then you can make an argument based on what I'm bringing to the table here. And it's that intersectionality. It is literally destroying culture, like you're saying. And here's where the pedal meets the metal, the actual meat of it, right? How does intersectionality and sort of this kind of politically correct sort of runaway effect is destroying culture is the very so by propagating individuals, fragmentary individuals, okay, you're trying to prop up the individuality of a culture, right? But you're doing it on a level that is intersectional, which means that you're going to divide individuality and diversity. You're diversifying it by cutting into fragmentary pieces what creates that culture. So you're dissecting the culture. You're saying, okay, so there's the black culture, let's say, for example, but then there are black women, and their black women have their own individual flavor that's different from black men. And then you have black men down from Africa. Then you have black men down from Africa who are disabled. Then you have black men down from Africa who are disabled and gay. It's like, you can fragment all of these into, impossible kind of categories, but these categories don't ultimately create a culture. They destroy any kind of basis for cohesion of culture. So, this idea that you can uphold culture by supporting diversity and acknowledging the intersectional values of people. It's like, no, you're destroying the very thing you're trying to uphold here, guys. Come on.
Yeah. Well, just to end the point I wanted to make is a huge part of what's fueling this destruction of culture that seems to be completely unconscious of itself is we're completely out of touch with reality, meaning nature. We used to have to follow cycles of nature, and that's what created our holidays, our like the spice of life. We were in touch with the cycles of nature, so we knew, okay, this food is for now, then we celebrate that food, but you have different traditions, like you have to take this root and boil it down into the water to grow these plants during this time of the year. All of this kind of stuff, that was the fucking spice of life, man. And there's a good expression I heard recently in French. I'm surprised I hadn't heard it before. It's ça prend toutes sortes de monde pour faire un monde, meaning it takes all kinds of people to make a world. It sounds a lot more clever in French, but and yet these people talk about diversity, yet they're trying to make everyone the same. It's so confusing to me. Anyways.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, to sort of tie a ribbon around that one as well, and everything in general up to now, is that I think we've exposed
a hat on a hat.
Yeah.
As you might say.
Yeah, but I think, when it comes to the mentality, we've pointed a few of the fallacies, we pointed the mechanisms for why it goes wrong, and we've also, kind of presented solutions and where thinking and critical thought goes right, and why it's important and why we support it. But ultimately speaking, I think, instead of debating these ideas, I want to take it into that new direction now, or into the same direction we've been going. And it's the very idea of not eliminating these people's, even their bad ideologies and their bad sort of system of thinking, because I don't think we're going to win that battle. It's not how it's kind of like, this is where I'm going to seem very cynical and pessimistic. But again, I had an interesting conversation today, which is what's given me all this kind of inspiration for this podcast. But I don't actually believe that you can help people. I think, and let me hear me out on this. I think, take life coaches, for example. They sell inspiration, they sell confidence. People, you know what I mean, just they're so inspired and they go and they spend their money, right? But confidence is very cheap. It's very limitless. There's barely any value to selling confidence. If I make you feel confident through my words and my passion and my sort of like wondrous charisma and charm, that confidence that you feel, you have to go out and manifest it now. It's like, how do you take that ball and run with it? It's not your confidence. You feel an inspiration from an external source, but you can't ultimately go and just and so this is why people love to sell confidence, because it's got no value, and you can create value by selling it. People come back. Of course they come back because they feel confident and inspired. They go into their lives, they try whatever. Tony Robbins, and then they come back for more. They pay for more money to be inspired and to have confidence, because you have to. Because it doesn't work that way. This is why I don't like to help people. I like to help people, but I don't try to help them by changing them.
It's a complicated thing.
It's a complicated thing.
Very hard thing to actually help someone without making them like dependent on you while you do it.
Exactly. I feel as if though it's kind of like they just have to get fucking tired of the bullshit that they're in. Yeah. They don't have to want to change. And it's a timing thing. It's up to them. So that's not to say that I don't actually help my friends and my family. I think it's worth trying to help them because you're creating a bond that's worth it between you two. And so you do help your friends, but I'm very careful as to who I spend my time and my energy on now. I really am very careful that it's not even about careful. It's a natural thing. I'm not going to try to inspire or give confidence or help someone with, with trying to change their mind or trying to make them understand something. I'm just going to, like you said, live by example and try to connect to the others with whom I can do that. And so by virtue of us existing and outnumbering the others, it's a very infectious thing. And so
it's very tempting to go out and yell at people and tell them that they're wrong. But
Yeah.
then you end up, like, to use a Jordan Peterson and Petersonian example, you end up with your room
Oh
trash.
God. I think you just coined a brand new term that might spread one day. The Petersonism. What is it?
Petersonian.
Yeah, you're spreading a Petersonian idea. That's a term you've coined. All right, sorry, keep going.
I mean, this is a common syndrome again in like activism. Activist people, I've heard it all the time from like radicalist people who are really trying to push change environmentally or socially. They'll go and they'll fight, and then they just get exhausted because their personal life and their very structure, their health, or their relationships fall apart because they're not taking care of any of that. And then they have no energy, they have no base to actually go out and make a change anymore.
Yeah.
If you center yourself and you focus on your world, and this comes again back to how culture should be, instead of going out there and trying to change everything, become in tune with the natural cycles that where you are, where, like, feel the fucking soil under your feet and be with the people who are directly in your three-dimensional life. By doing that, you slowly become aware of what problems you can fix. And then you do that, you get so good at it, your circle of influence grows and you actually start to be able to help others. And you go through the whole process. And it's not easy, but that's the whole point. That's the real work.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you've explained is very important for people who might be sitting there feeling and thinking, God, how do I make a difference? How do I go out and do what Jordan Peterson does or what Joe Rogan does? It's like these people have access. You don't have to. Yeah. Exactly. What you just explained is how you and I have to act. We don't, maybe there's like 3 people listening to this podcast right now, right? Maybe in the future we're going to have 50,000. But either way, what we're doing, outside of this podcast is what you just explained, and it is how things happen and how things should happen in terms of, you don't have to go out and yell at people or write a book or, do a podcast even. We're just doing this because it's the nature of what we love to do. But it's a very astute thing. I mean, thank you for putting that out there. That's an interesting.
Well, it's not just my idea. I mean, it's been said a million times, but
yeah, but I think, for you to bring it into the forefront of our minds is important to that's how you change things. You don't have to.
It relates to what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think.
And for example, I mean, what I've been doing for years is taking care of my health and researching health and how food production is done. And I've been working on this without doing anything publicly. That's what I've been doing for years. And that's made my life so much fucking better. It doesn't have to be a show-offy thing. I'm really not that kind of a person. I mean, I wish I was, but I have to force myself to come and do this kind of stuff. The only reason why this is working is because we're in different towns now, and we used to have conversations like this all the time. So I want to do this.
Exactly. But you see, like you said, it's a matter of who you are and what you want to do. And I think, when you said I'm not a show off and you wish you were, but technically I think you're referring to me and I know that you are because no, I know you are, but I'm not saying in the, I know what you're saying, and I'm about to explain it is that I have this, I have this kind of personality and mentality that I can learn through my own actions. That's how I believe I've survived and learned in this world is, and I know that, look, it's true. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I've been doing a lot more listening. And as I get older and wiser, I do a lot more listening, and that's what I do. On all day, online podcasts, YouTube, reading. I listen a lot. I need to do it a little bit more when I'm with people. So that's a mentality that I need to sort of kind of work on. That is to, when I'm having a live conversation, to listen to people more, and I'm working on it bit by bit. But generally speaking, I believe that, and this is kind of to be more esoteric, I think this is the idea behind why, you know, the spoken word or the written word is such a powerful thing. People have always said things like the pen is mightier than the sword, or, you know, revealed truths, that kind of stuff. And it's true, because, you know, when you verbalize something, when you put it out there, it has power. It's got so much power that people will kill and censor and spend billions on making sure that some things don't get said and others do, right? So words are very important, to the point, I think, even that you will learn by talking. If you talk a lot, doesn't matter what you talk about and in what direction, but you will learn about yourself. You will learn about the kind of connections that between the ideas that you're talking about and other people's ideas that you've heard about in the past. You learn by talking. A lot of the shit that I say, you know, typically will come out not on these podcasts, but when I'm having conversations like you and I in private, you know, a lot of the things that I say, they're new to me, and it's strange. It's like an inductive process.
Can I clarify something? I totally agree. And what I'm saying is, I think a lot of the times when people think like, oh, making a change in the world, or like they want to be an influencer, then they start thinking of someone like Jordan Peterson. They think of someone who has a lot of influence. But what I'm talking about is, I just to harp on what you just said, absolutely, you should have someone in your life, and if you don't, fucking find someone that you can talk their ear off about whatever comes into your brain. That is really important. That's something that you can do for yourself. That's a great step forwards. If you want to do it on YouTube, go ahead. But all I wanted to make as the original point is that improving your life doesn't have to be televised. You know, like they say, the revolution will not be televised. It doesn't have to be on your Instagram. It doesn't have to be part of your identity. Just do it.
Oh, dude, it's such this is why I love podcasting with you, man, because you say exactly the very necessary thing in the moment that it needs to be said. And that's exactly right. A lot of this mentality, a lot of this kind of leftism, outrageous kind of, you know, ideological rigidity and all this kind of stuff, a lot of it has to do with technology, Instagram, people, you know, this identity politics, all of it is all relevant to that as well. So you've just made a very astute observation again, and it's that, you know, you don't have to televise it. Everything doesn't have to be public. We are integrating into this weird society where, not necessarily weird, but into this society that's becoming increasingly more and more visible and exposed and more interconnected and less privacy and all these things. And so people get swept up in that to the point where they think that their lives have to be an expose, and it has to be ordered in such a specific way with good photos, and it has to have like all this kind of arrangement. And so they're using their own lives to be creative instead of being creative with their lives. It's like this weird thing, right? And so very good observation. You don't need to use Instagram, and you do need to have just natural conversations between people, and those ideas just being uttered between two people, it creates a sense, it creates a very almost ether around the two of you and your community, and so on and so forth, and that spreads, right? And so very, very good observation. And just to cap it off as to, you know, being a show off, that kind of thing, it might seem like that. And I know that you and I aren't friends because I know that we are friends, and that you wouldn't be my friend if I was any kind of show off. It's a nice way to put it, because you can interpret it that way. But I think people typically, find me to be genuine, and I strive to be genuine and not to show off. I'll admit I have had moments where I do try to show off, or I'll try to sound intelligent or whatever. And I am human, you know, I do make those mistakes, of course.
That's not a problem.
No, well, it is. No, there is an arrogance and that comes in with this sort of like.
But then, like on my side, I can be too passive. So
but the point is exactly. It's we try to you know, keep a balance, and so, but it's all to say that when I do talk and I learn from talking, and then I also learn from listening at the same time. But to learn by talking and to influence things, it's a discovery. And I just want people to really, really understand that point. It's a self-discovery. And again, at the risk of sounding kind of, I don't know, arrogant and self-involved, my friend Jordan kind of confessed something to me today. She she
Uh,
she
Is it
said,
appropriate for you to say this?
yeah, it is. It's very appropriate. But she said that, when I talk, I sound wondrous. I'm very wondrous. It's almost like I'm excited. And she even said that I'm kind of mousy in the sense, she didn't use the word mousy, but I kind of like look from one side to another, and I was like, wow, it's strange. Nobody's ever reflected, what I'm like very often. People don't do that. They don't. Well, in their face, I see, in their reactions, I see a reflection of myself. I think everybody does that. We live for those reflections, but she pointed them out so concretely. She said, yeah, you almost try to chase something, like an idea went that way, and you just caught another one there and here. And so that self-discovery and that kind of wonderment that I have when I talk, and it's the whole reason for why I talk so much. It's the whole reason for why I'm maybe interpreted as a show-off. It's because I have that discovery. This it's beautiful. It's kind of like, well, I just created a new thought. There's this new thing that happened that I didn't have before, a new piece of information. And I actually, in that moment that I was explaining this to her, I was actually explaining why I'm wondrous, because she said that. She's like, well, you always seem like you're discovering something. And of course, because using this sumo example, you know how I got into sumo wrestling this summer? Well, I'm not really into it that much anymore. I'm still fascinated by it, and I want to.
Of yours, he wasn't sumo wrestling; he was
Watching sumo wrestling, exactly. Yeah. Well, by telling her, I want to use an example out of nowhere. So that's what I do. I talk about shit out of nowhere. And so I said, okay, well, take sumo wrestling, for example, because I was trying to give her an example of how do you self-actualize in a sense. And so you self-actualize and you can create by talking, even if it has no context and it has no sort of direction. You will find out what you're talking about as you talk about it. So I used sumo, for example. I said, okay, cool. You know how I'm into sumo recently? It's very random, right? But that's because I was open-minded enough to try something new, take a new element, right? And so I was talking to her about that. Is that you need to use diversity. You try new things, you talk about new things, and then you discover new things. So I told her how I was watching stuff on YouTube, like fights and, like UFC and all this kind of stuff. And then I came upon sumo wrestling. And out of sumo, I learned a lot of things. I learned how it's possible to achieve a stability of fulfillment, of happiness in your personal life with something as simple as a craft like sumo. Like someone who just does woodworking their entire lives, or someone that just does sumo. These guys, they live day in, day out. They don't even have their own homes. They live together, like 12 guys to a room. They live and breathe sumo for years on end, okay? For their entire careers. That can last up to like 15 years. And it's amazing how they learn, they achieve this stability of life. They learn so many things from this one thing. And so I had talked about learning the connections between things when you put them together and then talk about them. And the very thing that I just explained to you, that I had learned that there's a connection between sumo and the stability in your life for happiness and the possibility of those two things. I hadn't even planned on saying it when I explained it to her.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's an inductive method. And this to me is important. And this is to tie it all off to the main subject here. If you want to eliminate this negative mentality, right? And if you don't want to fall prey to it, if you want to go the opposite direction, do that. And this is the very reason for why we need to fight political correctness and compel and yes, anti-free speech stuff, because you need speech. You need to talk about things freely, and you'll learn, and you'll integrate, and it's just amazing. It's amazing.
Well, that's another aspect of everything we've mentioned, is learning to know yourself, because I think there's such a dissociation from one's own identity now. Like, we're being pummeled by culture through screens that's telling us that on a subtle level you are just an amalgamation of your social influences. But I mean, that's what happens when all you do is consume. if you stop for a while, and this is what I've been doing lately, is I've stopped listening to podcasts constantly and reading, and I just go for walks, silence, and then I start having thoughts that I had never heard of before. And it took a while. And then I started hearing music in my head. I started writing songs in my head out of the blue. And it was really interesting. And I was like, this is me. But it was so me. It's hard to explain. And it didn't sound like a combination of all the things I've heard before.
That's so interesting. So I've just explained how talking a lot can help you discover, but you're just explaining the opposite. It's the same thing, how to be absolutely quiet. You will learn. Of course, I mean, we can look at Buddhism and meditation and all this kind of stuff. Of course, you're going to learn. Can you continue to just go deeper into that? How did you harness, because what you're talking about isn't full on meditation. It's just allowing for space.
Yeah,
you're allowing for space so that your subconscious, what Carl Jung would call the collective unconscious, could sort of fill in for you. So like you say, it's so you. Well, like your consciousness represents a crystallized version of you, in a sense, and the decisions that you make in real time and all this kind of stuff, it's kind of you, but it's not really you. The decisions that you make and the desires that arise that will catalyze itself in those decisions that you make when you're conscious, and those things that you think about, well, that seems to be a major part of you, right? So what you're talking about, can you explain how when you stopped and that you allowed for space for that sort of like just that essence of you to just fill that space with like all this creativity and like this beauty of different things, of the beauty of you, in a sense? How does that map? How did that feel? And how did you map that onto reality, in a sense?
Well, what I think it did and what it does, because I've had this on and off throughout my life, and it's sometimes it's hard to get back into the habit of doing this because it's challenging. It's challenging being yourself because it kind of challenges the world around you. At least the world the way it is now. But it makes you very, very aware of where things are in your environment. How do I say? It creates a kind of sacredness, an appreciation for something that is bigger than the sum of its parts. You know what I mean? And it made it seem like all of these ideas of like who we are, reducing it to gender or identities, it seemed really fucking silly because we're so much richer than that. Like, look at just walk down the street and look at how many different types of faces there are and how unique each face is. And you can look at a face and be amazed endlessly at all the expression in it, even if it's just a photo. And I feel like we're lacking this kind of appreciation for this deeply human and infinitely diverse and almost like magical, I don't know, like artistic aspect of life. And when we're missing that, we end up boxing things into these really dumbed down concepts that we can just like pick up in like these boxes that we can throw at each other in the face. And that's not what reality is at all. It's not who you are. And when you get more connected to yourself, then you start knowing what you want more. You start knowing like, hey, this person isn't so good for me. Even though like on the surface, this job makes me more money, it's really killing this beauty that is me. And at first it's like, nah, I'm not going to listen to that. I need this money. But then if you start listening to it, and this is why I call listening to your gut. It's pretty freaky, but I believe in a certain amount of intuition. You quit that job that's killing your soul. We'll call it a soul right now. Good things happen. Maybe you don't get like some like job that pays twice as much the next day, but you start getting more ideas. You start following more what your curiosity is. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. I think you're talking about an idea that hasn't been harnessed very, very much lately. It's because people either think about ideas and actions, or they think about inaction and meditation, but there's a comfortable middle, and there's an unnecessary middle where you harness the in between those extremities, right? And so like you said, you went on to, you know, for a walk, and you allowed for space. You know what I mean? It's a kind of meditation, but you ran. So here's the thing: to meditate is to allow for the thoughts to pass by, right? It's not to try to suppress them. It's allow for them to pass by and to be aware that they're passing by, and to simultaneously focus on one thing. It could be a point in space. It could be your breath. It could be a sound, whatever it is. But to focus on one point while acknowledging these thoughts that just sort of like pass by will eventually kind of dissipate the thoughts and just, you know, make you feel transcendence, and at some point just calm everything down, right? It makes you more complete in a sense. But what you're talking about is while you're doing that, the thoughts that actually do arise up, not to just let them flow away, but to channel them. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, you know, to be them, to live them, to run with one of these ideas that, so first off, you quell the ideas, you enter a meditative state, but then the ideas that come up naturally, you know, during your meditation, instead of letting them pass by and go on to the next idea, you pick one of them and you roll with it. This is, I think you're explaining something that happens to me, and I've been baffled. I want to know, what is this? And I think that's what it is. It's like a type of in-between meditation. It's not just a thought experiment or a meditation. It's in between. Because every time I get into the shower, there's a sense of meditation that flows through me, because I'm in a place where I can't stimulate my mind through, you know, music or anything, you know what I mean? Or even, okay, sometimes I'll bring in the phone and listen to, you know, Chopin or some other classical music or a podcast or something. But if I'm alone and all I hear is the sound of the water, you know, and it's feeling on my body, then that consistency, that repetitiveness, you know, that's why timing is important, right? With meditation, you know, that's why some people hum or, you know, do those kinds of like meditation bowls. This repetition puts you in that state. And so I'm naturally meditative in the shower, but then that state of meditation creates that space for the idea that's foremost in my mind lately, but it comes up so pure and so raw and so objective. And it's like, wow, you know, and then I as soon as I get out of the shower, I see clearly all the ideas that I had in my mind that were all disorganized. And then because I took a shower and I was in that sort of like in between meditative state, it allowed me to look at all those ideas that were fragmented into one objective, or one kind of like collage, one kind of entity that I can sort of distill. It's all distilled in my mind that I can just write down. It's like this brick of gold. And so, dude, yes, that is another essential tool to kind of recalibrate your mentality, man. Mm-hmm. I'm going to call this podcast, the mentality of the radical left. And then in parenthesis, it's going to be, includes remedies.
Basically, all that was about really is getting in touch with yourself. This is a theme that I guess I've been coming back to in this broadcast, I guess you could say. But it's being centering yourself, finding who the fuck you are and what your issues and what your thoughts are, and not thinking about it exteriorly. Because I think it's so easy to, in your mind, see yourself from the outside, see what other people are going to see on your Instagram, see we're being conditioned to see things that way. And there is a value to seeing things that way, but can you sit back and really see through your eyes and feel what you're feeling? Because that's the only way we're going to become aware of what your actual value is.
Expand on that. What you said, very important. To see through your eyes and what?
feel what you're feeling.
Feel what you're feeling. That is, again, I think you crystallize things in such an important way. I'm just going to quickly say this. So to me, that means to see through your eyes is to literally acknowledge that what you're seeing, that to almost focus on the fact that you are seeing, not paying attention to what it is you're seeing in reality and in the scope of what you can see, but to actually acknowledge, to be aware that you are perceiving, that you are seeing. And then you're doing the same thing with the body. You are feeling physical sensations. It's not focusing on what you're feeling. It could be a tickle in my toe, or an itch on my back, but to be aware that you are feeling. So to see what you're seeing and to feel what you're feeling objectively, very, very important. Okay, continue, please.
It's funny because that's something that we talked about earlier. Is I think there's almost a repression of our own subjective experience. We're all trying to be so fucking objective all the time that there's no appreciation, there's no space in our culture for subjective experience. And if we can't really fully, I don't know how to say, engage or celebrate in that aspect of life, then it becomes repressed, and it takes on a very dark aspect.
Yeah, of course. So dark that I have to say this, that by you doing that, you become subjective in a negative way. It's kind of like you're trying to be so objective, right? You got like some people who don't really realize that they really do mean well, and that's why I'm not like against everybody. Sure. They mean well. They want to, but for someone who says no, you got to be this way, you got to be that way, it's like political correct and all this kind of stuff. Well, I mean, they mean well. They want to be objective, but by doing that so much and by suppressing their subjective true thoughts, which they probably deem, they self-police, right? It's like 1984, George Orwell. They suppress what they actually feel and think, right? It's like, oh, I just had a sort of feeling that I can associate with bigotry here. I don't want to look at that black person again. I want to, or maybe I should do something that will kind of like, fight for that person's, kind of values in some way or form. So like,
the situation.
Yes.
Like, I looked at him. He saw me looking at him.
Yeah, it's like, I
should smile.
But that's exactly it. So I just wanted to point that out. What you're talking about, it makes absolute sense. We're just trying to be so objective that we're suppressing our subjectivity to the point where it's negative, but also that we're inadvertently being subjective in an even worse manner.
Yeah. And it's funny because ultimately you can only perceive objective reality through a subjective lens. And objectivity, you can only experience the subjective through an objective lens. Do you see what I'm saying?
Explain that.
The fact that you're experiencing objectivity subjectively is objective. See what I'm saying? It's a loop. It becomes the same thing ultimately. It's once again this right versus left thing. When you go too far in one direction, it becomes the same extremism.
Okay, yeah.
But
But I just want to wrap my head around it. So I understand that you have to look at even an objectivity is perceived with a subjective lens, right? But
yes,
but it's the second part that becomes a little bit confusing. Say it again.
I know. I understand. Sorry. I was just asked by someone in the house to put a headset on.
No problem.
1 second. Gotta find that thing.
So I'm going to try to think this through for myself, though. So, like, you're talking about being objective. If you're being objective, that you're being objective through a subjective lens.
Yes, because you can only perceive what appears to be objective through your perception, through your senses, which are subjective, right? But the fact that you are perceiving subjectively is objective.
Okay, I understand. Yes, okay. So that's an important this thing to distinguish. So because you're perceiving, sorry, say that again.
Yeah, it's very
say it again.
finicky. Okay, so the fact that you're perceiving an objective reality through your limited senses,
Yeah.
which are subjective, that whole fact is objective.
Why? Why would it be objective?
Well, it's objective. Obviously, I am not just experiencing this lamp here, as it is in every single way, shape, and form. I'm perceiving it subjectively from the angle I'm seeing it at through my methods of conception. But the fact that I'm perceiving it subjectively is objective. We can all agree to that, right?
Okay. So yes, the actual activity of perception, of subjective perception, is in itself objective. Yes, that makes sense. Yeah. So like,
it's a loop. It's when we try to find this like clear cut. It's either objective or it's subjective kind of bullshit. We fuck ourselves over.
I think you're right. I think part of this negative mentality that's been going around is the negation that the act of subjective perception is objective. So people don't want to admit that. They try to eliminate that out of the human sort of like, at least they try to make it an immoral thing. If not, they try to ignore it completely. It's like they say, well, everything that you do is subjective and you have to keep that in check. And it's like, no, I mean,
well, how do you do that if everything,
exactly,
if all your perceptions are subjective? Then it just comes back to the idea, oh, we're all insane and we can't do anything about it. Well, fuck off. No,
but they do say that maybe, and then they say, but we can do something about it though. And they say we should, compel speech and be. And then
they go the opposite extreme of being like, that's the objective thing that we can all do. But wait a second. You don't think you're going too far with your subjectivity saying that that's the objective way to do everything? It's
a real loop. It's a vicious cycle. But I think you've pinpointed another kind of problem there with the whole this mentality has been so much more complex. It seems trivial and ridiculous at first, and it's silly. Of course it is, right? Because you're looking at people who are like, yeah, man, I'm looking at, wait, sorry, not man. I'm sorry that I said man. Yeah, no, men don't exist. It's like, it's so silly. But this mentality has turned out to be so complex to the point where we can't stop. It keeps going. We keep on finding new things about this mentality that it's so intricate. You know what I mean? Just like this subjective objective thing. It's amazing.
If you try to break down everything, then you get infinite parts. So
yeah, well, I guess I
mean that's the fallacy of pure rationality, is if you try to break everything into its constituent parts, then you end up like, if you take apart a frog, you're killing it in the process. That's what we're doing to life right now. We're tearing it apart so that we can look at every part of it, so we can figure out how it works and master it, but we're killing it in the process. And that's not how it works. That's not how it works at all.
Yeah.
Not even vaguely. And it's crazy that most of our science is based on this.
Dude, you actually, like, right now, your face, it really actually looked like you were trying to explain it to this little, like, this 6-year-old kid that's killing his pet frog. You're like, dude, that's not what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to study life by tearing this thing open and looking at its organs.
Let's just say there's more sophisticated ways to do it. You wait till the frog is dead, and then you know.
But then it's not alive. Then you're not studying life.
Yeah, that's a good point. But that's the problem, right? We got to do it with the handicap of staying alive. That's life. Welcome to figuring out life, right?
But okay, because there's a basic tenet in physics that we know. It's like, and this comes back to what I was talking about before. It's like, we are so much richer. No one wants to touch on anything esoteric or spiritual.
Sorry. We are so much richer. Can you take it from there? It kind of.
Yeah, we're so much more sacred. There's so much power in life that, and I feel like we're stripping life of this. Then we like to say, fuck. Where was I going with that?
Well,
Continue. It'll come back to me.
okay. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
to take up the reins from that point, I mean, what does it mean to strip life away? And it
Oh,
means.
sorry, I just remembered.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a basic idea in physics. It's that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's a strange phenomenon in nature that when things come together, they start acting very differently than you'd expect by just throwing them all together. It's like Nick Lane, one of the lead researchers in trying to figure out where life came from. He said that the old theory that it was just a bunch of amino acids being struck by lightning that came together and formed life is like trying to say you can throw a bunch of car parts into a pool and expect them to turn into a Ferrari. It's bizarre, and we don't understand it fully, but it's like, look at water. It's hydrogen and oxygen. Those are two flammable gases. You put them together, it becomes a non-flammable liquid. It's a strange thing. It becomes a new whole. It's not just two things that were once separate coming together and just jammed together.
Yeah, yeah. It's, and I think if you look at the another sort of fact when it comes to physics is apparently all of matter only exists today because it's sort of won out against this. So there was at the Big Bang, within the first microseconds, apparently, there were the particles of matter and antimatter were just popping into existence and sort of annihilating each other as almost as instantaneously. As the moment that they came into existence, they annihilated each other. But that process happened so many times, and at some point, matter won out over antimatter. That matter, more matter, I guess, sort of annihilated antimatter than antimatter annihilated matter. And so that's why we're stuck with like something like 6%. I'm just pulling that out of my ass, but it's definitely, more than 90% of the universe apparently is something that's made of not matter anyway. And then we call it, dark matter. But, so the whole reason that we live with this matter, this sort of positive matter, is because it won out somehow. It's just kind of like a strange phenomena. So and then you look at the way that matter functions, which is what you just explained, that if you collect this matter, the more you put those different pieces of that matter together, then the collective aspect of those pieces makes it more than what those pieces came together. That's a very strange, counterintuitive thing, and it almost makes you look at how going up the hierarchy of things that are thrown together to build, say, a human being with a conscious brain and all this kind of stuff, it makes you think that maybe we live by that same sort of counterintuitive mechanism, that we are thinking in ways that are perhaps, individualistically, like they're fragments, and the sum of all of our thoughts together is what is being achieved here. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it's greater and greater wholes. It's the same way that we have separate organs inside our bodies, but they all work together as a whole.
And so I don't know. I think it's a clear kind of perspective on mentality in a sense, and how things work. That it definitely shows you how, no matter how certain we might be of things, there's very counterintuitive facts out there, and it's very difficult to be certain based on your own subjective mentality. You can't just say, this is it's very interesting.
Well, here's another example is and this is a scientific experiment that was done ages ago and has proven this concept. Is they've done it many times since. They took an aquarium, they took out the water, they put the fish in a different bowl of water, and they stripped all of the minerals and the elements from each other of the water, and then put them back together. And then they put the fish back in that water, and the fish died very quickly. And they don't know why.
What? What
Yeah.
is it? Almost like the I think you're talking about the memory, probably water, that matter can retain memory.
Well, water physics is a whole topic that's incredibly controversial and difficult to tackle. But it's just to underline this fact that there is something more going on. And I'm not saying it's some like magical fucking fairy
Yeah,
dust
but
or
it,
some shit.
it, it
But
points to the very real fact that we don't know what the fuck is going on, whatever it is,
yeah,
and that
exactly.
we gotta come to terms with that fact. And if you don't, you're gonna end up with a shitty mentality.
Yeah, and you have to live your life as a fucking human being. Like, just meditate on that concept of like what a human is as a whole. And we're amazing. We can do so much. I think humans are the most beautiful fucking things ever. And to reduce us into these groups and all that it's dehumanizing by its very right. And to call like some group left, one group right, the worst is when you do it to yourself. That's then you're destroying yourself. You're destroying your own soul. But I think we need to bring more of this aspect of treating ourselves as sacred, almost in a sense,
Yeah, but you see,
because it brings out something. It brings out the best in us. It
I
really does.
I think you've just mentioned something that's a bit of a problem, though. I mean, like, you say that, we need to, I think we've been saying that we need to realize these things and that to achieve a greater mentality, but we're basing those things on facts that are in themselves being debated. So it's like, how do you use examples like that? How do you say, well, look, there's a lot of things that are counterintuitive in this universe and that we can prove to you factually with a science experiment right there in your face.
Yeah.
And that's been rejected. So that's the problem. It's like you can't use that to help the mentality along and try to get people to be less indoctrinated, right? Like, how do you...
I can talk about so many cases of like scientific experiments that are pretty well known. Like I don't know if you know about Dr. Masaru Emoto's work. He did it on water crystals, and people like saying either positive or negative things to the water and then freezing the water and looking at them in microscopes. And most people have heard of this, and you can see like love and it's a beautiful snowflake, and then it's like Hitler and it's just like chaotic bubbly water and you can't see through the ice. And this hasn't been refuted. I understand if you tell me, oh, that sounds woo-woo, but these experiments have been done by first graders in schools all over the world. They do it on plants. I've done it myself. It works. But yet, everyone's heard of this. We don't address it at all, and it doesn't affect, like, just that concept in itself should change everything about the way we see life.
That's interesting, because I haven't done that, and I technically don't believe it, and I want to go and believe it, so I'm going to go and try it myself
there
tonight.
You go. And look, I'm open to the idea that it might not be true, but I haven't seen it disproven yet. I haven't seen anyone disprove it.
Here's the difference, though. Look, I don't believe it. I can't take your word for it completely, right? So I'm going to go and do it myself. But the point is, I'm willing to go and try it myself. And then if the results are the same as you've predicted, then I will definitely say, well, look, I don't know why. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have the power over this thing, I won't extrapolate anything from it, but at least I'll be able to be on the same page as you and say, dude, yeah, I guess this is a thing. But see, people don't want to do that when it comes to, things, because they want to support to no end. They want to support their idea, and it doesn't matter how much proof you will bring to them. And I think that's what's so strange about the human brain, is that you can have a mentality to that point that's rigid. And when it's become rigid to the point where they can look at you in the face and say, I am a Filipino woman. Genetically speaking, look at me. Look at my gorgeous brown skin, beautiful tits. I could be looking at you in the face right now and say that, which apparently a guy did already. His name was Jadu, and I don't know. So he took it up a notch, right? It's not just transsexual, it's transracial, okay? Anyway, the point is, they can do this now. So that's how rigid this mentality can be, is that it doesn't matter. They have a system of belief that's not even grounded on faith. It's grounded on absolute delusion. So how do you crack that? How do you crack that mentality? Like I said, I think what we've been sort of providing are solutions to understanding it a little bit and how it works, the cognitive dissonance and all this kind of stuff, and this sort of loops between subjectivity and objectivity. And I think we've covered a lot of ground. You know, there's a lot of things I'm not mentioning, but at the end of the day, man, the only statement I'm making here is it's just God.
Open up to the idea that you might be completely fucking wrong about everything. And guess what? I know that's scary. That's terrifying, but it opens you up to the greatest adventure ever. And you can always ask yourself, like, why do I think the things I do? And then when you do that long enough and you find the things that are really well founded, then you can work off of that. And you're like, hey, okay, these things are real. And you have to go through that process of not knowing to find what you do know. And then even those things might fail you eventually, but at least you have that springboard to get on to the next thing.
That's exactly right, man. See, like, this is why we need to use facts, logic, rationality, science, community, free speech. All these things allow us to do that, like you just explained, within a certain spectrum of truth. We know that there's no absolute. We can't say, okay, the things that we can agree on right here are absolute truths. We don't know that. All we know is that these are the observations that we know and that we can sort of rectify between each other. That's at least a starting point, but we don't even have that starting point anymore, right? So that's the problem, right? Is in a sense it's that. But you're right, man. There's no reason for why, testing things between us and trying to establish a consensus of some kind. Why it shouldn't. There's no reason for why that shouldn't lead to greater understanding and more peace, as opposed to this sort of insane mentality that we should silence certain people, even if the ones who are at the top, and we need to recognize intersectionality, and we need to support the idea that offending someone is a crime against humanity, and all these bizarre things that have sort of permeated our culture right now.
Well, I think there's a few things there. One thing that I've been thinking about lately is maybe it's just in my head, but the very powerful lack of curiosity and drive to learn I see. Most people I meet are very disinterested in learning day to day, and I'm obsessed, man. It's hard for me to stop listening to podcasts all the time. And every time I hear an opinion, every time I think of something that I'm like, oh, this is true, then I catch myself and I write it down, and then I try doing the research to see who disagrees with this opinion of mine. And I'm constantly doing this.
Yeah, I know. I'm the same way, dude.
I don't understand when I find out that someone's only obsession in life is music, and that's great, right? Or like, okay, when it's really a problem is when their only obsession in life is like getting drunk and cats. Right? I don't understand it, but I think it comes down to a few things. I mean, it could be trauma. It could be all the different things that ultimately end up to an unconscious philosophy of a very nihilistic point of view. It comes down to people's fear, their insecurity in themselves, insecurity in the world. They don't feel like the world is a good place or that it makes any sense, really. And all of these things stop us from developing the curiosity and the drive that will allow us to do better. That's it.
Yeah, I think I agree, but I think to make it more full, I would also add that the people aren't necessarily not curious. That's the one I would disagree with. Everything you said makes sense, but
that's possible.
Except for the thing that people aren't curious. I think people are insanely curious, but their ability to widen that curiosity, that range of curiosity, is in fact constrained by the very things you were talking about. You're saying that people, don't, because of their nihilism, because of all these other things, that their curiosity is only sort of like hyper specialized in one area. And that's why you got like some dude who's just always talking about cars. It's just cars, and this seems to satisfy him. But these people, you can see there's an element of lack. There's a lacking of happiness or potential happiness there, because they've only limited themselves to this small range of curiosity. They say, well, I'm going to be curious about this, but you can see it's almost like the more narrow their topic of curiosity is, the more obsessed with it there will be, because that's the point. Curiosity seems to be innate, and a similar, the curiosity seems to be like almost like, as much as you need to drink water, I need to drink water, right? But you may need it to a little bit more, I may need to a little less. But the want is still there. I want to drink water, and you want to drink water as well, because we want to stay alive. But see, these people, you know, because all they're drinking is this one thing, this car type stuff. Well, it's not enough. They don't just want to, what's next? It's like, okay, well, more car stuff and deeper, and so on and so forth. And then if the car stuff doesn't, you know, if it stops somewhere, if they get down to the, let's say they like NASCAR and they like to buy cars and they like to go to car shows, then at some point that's not enough. So are they going to get into the engineering side of cars? No, maybe they say, oh, fuck that, I don't like math, I'm not into that part of the car stuff. So then what do? Well, they substitute with drugs. They substitute with bad things, and then so on and so forth. And then the realm of their curiosity stays narrow because of that, and that's a bad loop.
Well, it's as soon as you get to the point where your topic connects to everything else, because all things are ultimately interrelated. And that comes back again to what I was saying about, as humans, we're meant to be well-rounded. We're meant to have a metaphysical, philosophical center to our life. And then everything branches out from there, and it all connects back to the same thing ultimately. But when you've been told that life is a certain way and you just go in one direction, you can go that direction for a while, and that's what's safe, and that's what's fun, and that's what's rewarding to you. But then you eventually get to the point where suddenly it loops back and it connects to everything else, and then you get freaked out. Because like, to go with your analogy of water, we both have different needs for water, but what if you think that the water is poisoned, right?
Yeah. That's an interesting thought. That's true. Yeah. It's the ideas, man. They really do impact our very lives. This is what creates ideas. It's so powerful, man. They create and they destroy. And so, fuck, that's why people who limit themselves. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should go out there and be like, you know, curious sort of geniuses everywhere, but because it's not, you know, feasible, obviously. It's just, but there is a certain level. I mean, like, Look,
I'm just going to say again, I said it at the beginning, maybe this is in my head, but maybe we can't. Maybe the way that things are right now, there's literally nothing more that anyone can do. And I'm just really lucky to have had the time and the energy to put the energy into this kind of research. But at the same time, I don't know, man. I feel like in many cases, I went against all odds. I absolutely fucking hated my life. I was miserable, depressed, incredibly sick for a long time. Yet just because of a basic philosophical belief that maybe there's a purpose to all this. And if I put in the work, I'll get somewhere better than anything I can imagine, because I couldn't conceive of anything good, anything vaguely good. Just that inkling got me to where I am now.
Yeah, but see, like, again, we're talking about, you know, mentality here, and
attitude.
The mentality that led you to, you know, to being more philosophical and at least more curious, so that it allows you to be more open-minded and free. You know, I think that, look, I think it's not necessarily that everybody has to be kind of philosophical in the same sense that we are, but you know,
of course not.
At the end of the day, I think you just kind of put the I think you've put the hammer on the nail here. You've hit it on the head, because at the end of the day, your very nature as a human being has to do with this mind that we've been sort of giving. You know, whether you want to see it as being given or being created or just kind of arise out of nature. The point is, we use our minds. We have brains. This is how we've achieved everything. This is how we can think and talk and experience and have self-awareness. Our minds are there. They exist. So to confine it to any degree, to me, isn't a decision of anybody. I think it has to do with, like you said, you know, a myriad of different environmental factors, things that happen to the person, all these things. And so that mentality that sets in, the same mentality that Schopenhauer was talking about when he said that people who don't wonder about the contingency of themselves and the universe they inhabit are mentally deficient. The mentality that even Hitler was describing in his book, because I've been, you know, you study the evil as well if you want to understand evil, and he talks about having worked with, you know, the proletarians, you know, the down and dirty, the nihilists who were just like anti-nationalists. They were very like, oh, fuck the government and it's all just for shit, and, you know, and fuck the ruling class, and we're all just working men and this all sucks, you know, and of course he was against that. He's like, well, you know, no, we need the country needs to know how great it is if it's going to, and in that sense he was right. It's very true. You know, you need to be aware that who you are and your culture and your abilities is a good thing in order to rally people together. So he's a genius in that sense. He knew
went a little too far there, but yeah,
of course he went too far, but he understood politics. The same thing that he was talking about is the same thing that any genius politician would tell you from history. The good ones, the bad ones, they understand, you know, that you need to be aware, first off, that there is something good, inherently speaking, in humanity and in yourself as a human being, as an individual human being. And this awareness is what allows you to develop the mentality that is more progressive, that is more positive, that allows for a happiness, a well-being that we're all looking for. And these people get caught in these negative mentalities, whether it's manifested as a political ideology like we're seeing now, or as a nihilistic sort of like, you know, way of acting and behaving. These mentalities can only be sort of freed the moment that they're shown that there is beauty with the mind, and that you have to fuel that curiosity beyond the constraints that you've put there because you feel and pain and fear of what's beyond those constraints.
It's just funny because like I think we're really trying to tear down some walls that a lot of people don't address much, but you know, like most of the greatest,
they fear it, right?
And most of the greatest physicists throughout history ended up becoming like students of Kashmir Shaivism and Vedic philosophy and the Kabbalah, and they were believers in God. And that was like most scientists until like I think like the 40s were very God driven. And the whole, like you can read text from back then and they're like, well, what would be the point of furthering society if there wasn't a goodness to life? I think the guy who found the cure for polio, or it was the guy who created penicillin, I forget, but he didn't patent it. He gave it out for free because
you're talking about polio, Jonas Salk.
Yeah.
Salk.
Yeah, because he believed in a greater good.
Yeah, I think he said, would you patent the sun?
Yeah.
And
there you go.
Yeah, he said, like, you know, the sun it's just there. It's there for everybody. It's not even about good or bad. I think he saw it as something that was a natural right of being.
Well, that's good. You know, that's a good thing. That's an inherently good aspect to the inherent right of life.
No,
right?
I know, because we've decided that to be good, obviously. But I'm too skeptical.
It's straight up good. Okay, it's straight up good.
It's good because it exists. Yeah, in this sense.
And I think, see, this is another taboo: is the idea that there is straight up goodness in life and straight up evil. Well, there is such a thing as those extremes. Most things are in between. Things are in between, but they do exist.
You're right. They do, because of the spectrum that we sort of like inhabit. But
Yeah.
you know that when I say, you know, it's not good in that sense, it's because I'm being the philosopher, skeptical type, you
What you
know,
mean, like not
define
good in
good.
like the absolute metaphysical
Yeah,
beyond
yeah.
human sense? Hey, you know
Define.
what? I
It could
believe in
be.
that too.
No, no,
I don't
it could be, but you know what I mean.
exactly.
I was just trying to throw the spokes in your wheel a little bit, and I detracted from the conversation. It wasn't good, but
No, I get the point, but and it brings up like you're playing devil's advocate for how most people would talk about this kind of stuff.
yeah,
But
but I think let's get back to the main point. Is when he said that, you know, you wouldn't patent the sun. It had to do with the idea that some things are inherently sort of like it's almost like a statement on existence. It's like, this exists, this cure exists. It's not something that is harnessed. That's not part of the existence itself. Existence doesn't harness itself here. You know what I mean? That's what I think he meant. It's kind of like, you know, this cure isn't something that is harnessed. It's something that is intrinsic to the reality that I happen to have stumbled upon, right? That there's a cure for this. And so it's not something that can be harnessed. And that
and
in
what you're
itself is
saying,
good. It's good. It's
yeah,
very,
that means truth,
yeah.
true reality, and that which is inherent in reality, meaning this cure, is ultimately good. And what would be the one evil thing you could do is go against that and patent it and keep it for yourself, meaning turn away from good. And that's that's like the biblical definition of evil.
Yeah.
It's
so I guess tie that off with what you were talking about beforehand. So you're using Jonas Salk and this idea of truth and the link between truth and goodness as being something that exists.
I mean, I think I've made my point. Is just that the idea that science is completely outside of the realm of some kind of almost sacred good.
Oh, like a morality in general, yeah.
Yeah, is ridiculous. And
No.
if you actually look at the history of science and some of the greatest influencers of all time, it really does fall apart. And a lot of these people started off thinking that way. And then I think there's a famous quote. I think it's one of the guys who discovered DNA. He said, science is like, the first step is you taste like atheism, and then you find God at the bottom of the cup. It's not to say that I believe in a Christian God or anything, but
oh yeah, no, I've heard a variance of that. It was someone else who said.
I'm paraphrasing big time.
I think it was Francis Bacon. I could be wrong, but he said a little bit of philosophy leads you away from God, and a lot of it leads you back to God. So I think
I'm thinking of a different quote, but yeah, for sure.
No, I know. I'm just saying there's a variance that I had heard, and that's the one. But you know, when it comes to science and morality, I think Sam Harris made a good statement between the two and how they're linked in a TED Talk that he spoke. But also, I think I heard Lawrence Krauss use an interesting example recently in a podcast where it might have been Lawrence Krauss. Anyway, it's like morality isn't something that we can kind of establish with science, but it is something that morality is something that without science we wouldn't have any point of reference for. So like, for example, I can't say that it's a good thing that women suffer when they suffer pain when they give, you know, childbirth, but I can ascertain that the pain that she is feeling is something that is undesirable. And then from there, we can establish whether we should make it immoral for women to suffer when they give, you know, when they give birth to their children. And so we can use medication. But at the same time, you can argue for a different kind of morality, which is, well, you know, the pain that she's experiencing is completely positive in its end run. The content of the suffering has to do with life, and that's a beautiful thing. And so some people say, well, I don't, and that's why you see some women, they say, no, I want to have a natural birth purely on moral grounds. I don't want to be drugged up for this experience of me giving life to someone else. So, but at the end of the day, we understand that the point of reference relies on pain, and pain is something that that we can only obviously test through science, through scientific means.
What? No. Not at all.
Well, in that sense, do you know what I mean? in the sense of
I don't know, man.
well, think about it this way. Are you going to figure out whether a mollusk can feel pain just by, I don't know, thinking about it? No, you're going to have to do some scientific testing.
Yeah, but we're human beings.
Yes, but
We
I'm
can
just
communicate.
so maybe it's not the best example. It was my example. Lawrence Krauss has used another. I don't know which one it is, but do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, but I mean, there's some pretty old concepts to morality. Is if you can't extend morality to those who can't extend it back to you. So morality doesn't apply to animals, for example. I mean, there is a certain degree of like basic compassion, but that's entirely subjective. That's emotion. That's empathy.
No. Yes, but what I'm talking about here is not. I mean, that's irrelevant. What I'm talking about is how science doesn't. You can't extract morality from science, but science is a point of reference that you ultimately need in order to establish morality in some way, shape, or form. Right?
I don't know. I don't know if, like, if you can think of another example that would explain it better, then
I think Yuval Harari had explained it in another interesting way in his book as well. Fuck, I really need a good example for this. Well, let me think. I mean, okay, so here's the. I don't know if this is ultimately linked, but I read this in his chapter today. It's that, when it comes to abortion, I think it was some tribe in Africa. I think it might have been the Masai Mara. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It was some tribe in Africa where they believe that abortion is wrong, just like we believe that abortion is wrong to some degree. You don't kill a baby that's 2 years old. Okay, that's an abortion. That's
is
wrong.
it even? I can't believe that that's considered abortion. I thought abortion originally was only like while it's still in the womb.
No. You'll explain for a second. You'll see why.
Yeah.
We understand that the morality, we draw the line with immorality by saying that killing babies is wrong. That's, we can all agree on, right? But if you end up being specific and you say, well, killing or aborting a fetus isn't wrong because it doesn't feel pain, right? Yeah. That's your morality that you've distinguished because of science. You know that the fetus doesn't feel pain. But some conservative Catholic can say it doesn't matter if it doesn't feel pain. It's still life, and you don't extinguish life. That is immoral, right? Now, you again need to fall back on science and say, well, is it alive? What constitutes alive? Well, you need to use scientific basis for that. See, now going back to the tribe in Africa, they don't consider a baby alive until it's given a name. And so until they give until they do the ceremony where they name that newborn baby, they can still abort the baby. And indeed they do. If the baby is deformed or hasn't sort of acclimated to its environment somehow, if some fucking problem happens and they have it, then so they literally, once the baby is born, there's a certain amount of time that they won't name it. It's probably for that reason, to ascertain whether it'll be able to survive or not, and if it'll be good for the society or not. And so they'll abort it, right? They won't give it a name if it turns out fucked up. And in that sense, they've justified their morality. They've said, cool, the baby, but obviously they don't use science. They don't they rest purely on their morality, and they say this is okay to do because we haven't given it a name. And so the name ceremony is in itself, what takes the place of science. So we use science because we know that it's more empirical and it has greater specificity that allows us to give more kind of basis for the moralities that we extrapolate.
So. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's a great tool for philosophy to extend itself and get more specific.
Yeah, it's the root. It's, in essence, it is philosophy, but it's more specific. So science and philosophy, it's all interconnected, right? And morality and all these things. So I guess to have established that is important when it comes back to the mentality thing. Again, this has to do with mentality. If people understand that the connection between the two, I think they'll understand that yeah, you do need to look at gender as something that's factual on a scientific basis, and that it's
Well, okay, once again, all of these things come down to a spectrum. I mean, there is absolutely an aspect of gender that is rooted in fact. And then when you're talking about, because a lot of the problems that arise out of from the left's perspective is, well, as soon as you say someone's a man, then it's not just that they have a penis. There's so many associations that come along with that. And there is an aspect to that I agree with. That is an issue. But like most of these issues end up right in the middle, where unfortunately, like it's not just that men are socially pushed on a certain personality. No, we have certain hormones and biology that makes us a certain way usually. But there is still a spectrum
there are
where there
outliers.
is, yeah, and there's plenty of them.
Yeah.
And
but here's the thing:
all kinds of variants.
We have to come to this very clear statement that there's a difference between. So look at it this way: if we tell everybody we support transgender rights and all this kind of stuff, but we want you to acknowledge that there is a difference, such a difference as a man and a woman. The reason why they don't want to acknowledge that is because you've already given them what they wanted. At first, it was like, okay, well, there's transgenders, and they have to have the freedom to, transition if they would like. All these things, and we shouldn't discriminate against them. These are things that they won out immediately. It wasn't even something that they had to win. It just was. So where do you take it? If there's no argument, where do you take it? Well, you take it to the science. You take it to the facts. Well, and that's why it devolved. It started that way. It was like, well, trans people are being discriminated against, right? And then a lot of people said, okay, great, let's not discriminate them, but let's also, but then, I don't know. Maybe we should look into that, because how did it go from trans rights discrimination to the debate that men and women, I guess it's just such a flammable kind of topic. But the point is, because it inflamed, and people were like, well, what is a man? What is a woman? We need to describe these things in order to, maybe that's what it was. How do we determine if someone has been discriminated against? Maybe it's just a man that looks kind of like a woman. They're not really trans. And then, whatever, there's some different ways, scenarios that can pop up. And so the debate comes into play. And then in order to win the discriminatory case, they push it to the fact that there's no gender. It's like, guys, look, if let's say I do say, okay, there's no gender, you've won that argument as well. Where are you going to take it next? Where are you going to take it next?
Yeah.
So that's why I think we need science. We need to reinstall that. We need to reinstall the consensus making apparatus, and we need to install
not Bruce Nye science,
or Bill Nye.
Bill Nye. Oh my God, yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Bill Nye, not Bill Nye science.
With that atrocious sort of show, kind of weird.
Dude, he made sex jokes in front of 12-year-olds.
Yeah, that's not appropriate. There's certain things that I'm not a sexual taboo guy. I mean, obviously I'm quite European and liberal in that sense. I think it shouldn't be taboo, but
no, I agree.
But there are some things you don't talk about in front of children.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think there was literally, they had some trans girl rap about her vagina in front of them.
What?
Anyways. Yeah, it was like the follow-up to Bill Nye. I was about to say Bill Nye, Bruce Nye. But anyways, all to say, just so everyone knows, he's actually just an electrical engineer, educationally, and also, he most of what he's talking about now in Bill Nye, not Bruce Nye. Bill Nye's what's his new show? Bill Nye Saves the World. Yeah, most of what he says now, you can literally go back to his old show, Bill Nye the Science Guy, and he says the complete opposite. And
yeah, of course. I mean,
that guy's a total shill. I can't.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we're starting to run into circles a little bit, because then that's the nature of what we're talking about here, is that it all sort of revolves around this cycle, this vicious cycle. Whether you look at it from from a perspective of a bad mentality or a bad philosophy or a bad logic, we can look at it from all these different angles, but it always goes back to the same thing, and it's this sort of paradox that's just evil, bad paradox.
Yep. Yep. And it's just anti-reality.
Anti-reality. That's right, man. So I feel like there's going to be a new term that'll arise after this era. You know, just like we've named the postmodernists as being postmodernists. What are these people? You know.
Well, I think postmodernism is part of it.
It is. I mean, but it's like a one-up, fucked up version on crack. It's kind of like the bath salts or whatever. Like,
well, I think we've been calling it the radical left.
Yeah, but I mean, these people are. I mean, this seems like this is a movement that is technically one-upped itself. Postmodernism didn't stop, and this is just a new flare-up of postmodernism, but it's becoming its own thing. It's I don't know. It could look postmodernism. You know, everybody sort of kind of comes up with their own facts in a sense, but there are at least facts that have always existed that nobody debated. There was always some things that people said, "Yep." And that's out the window. So this is a whole new thing, man. It's not just postmodernism wherein they introduce new ideas based on facts, and new perspectives, new interpretations. I think, you know, this is just, I don't know, post-reality. You know, it's post-reality. I just don't know how to make that sound good in terms.
Well, if we keep going down that road, we will be post-reality.
Exactly. I mean, these people are propagating their own post-realities.
Yeah. No, it feels very anti-life to me. It's just like
it's anti-human.
We're breaking down all the things that. Okay, I understand that we want to break away from tradition, but there is a certain amount of tradition that's absolutely necessary. For example, to produce our food.
That's the wrong word. That's the wrong word. That's the wrong word. Not tradition. What? It's not about breaking away from tradition. Yeah. Like you said, traditions aren't things that you need ever.
No, what I'm saying, but the traditions are often based in real.
Yeah, they are. They are. Some traditions are. Yeah, they carry forward the things that are necessary to our survival. For example, it's kind of like, well, you know, I think, again, Yuval Harari, very very good kind of reference to go back to. He explains how there's religions that in the past the sacrificing of animals was a lot more than just a sacrifice to appeal to the gods. It was a tradition that allowed them to survive. Because what do you do when you sacrifice animals? Well, you don't just leave them there to rot. You eat them, right? So in a sense, you have like different traditions, yes, that apply to your survival. But in terms of abstract thoughts and concepts, I mean, it's not necessary to our survival.
I totally agree that there's plenty of tradition that we can do away with. But what I'm getting at is we kind of are throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
It's just throwing away all, how would I say, I guess, sustainable life, or like how we used to do things. As soon as because I always come back to this. Now that like less than 2% of the human population knows how to grow food, and most of that population only knows how to run the machines that grow the food, and we have no idea how to actually take care of the land and make it like rotate crops and everything like that. As soon as we move away from that, we're screwed on such an ultimate level.
Dude, it's kind of funny, but I mean, it's at the same time incredibly sad. But there you go. Humor is very dark. It's like you saying that so prophetically and like so genuinely. I love it. It's funny because you're just like, dude, what are we gonna do? But you're right, though. You're right. You're absolutely right.
There's talk about like lab grown meats and like mass processed soy protein products that we could all live off of. Like we would be living off of this white sludge shit, but there's no nutrition in it. And the only way that we can have nutrition is by rotating crops and using the animals and actually taking care of the land, which most of us are forgetting. And there's a movement now to bring these kinds of ideas back, because most of the food that we have now has like less than a thousandth of the nutrition that it had 100 years ago. That's very fast.
Yeah,
I mean, this could be contributing to a lot of the mental illness that's growing as well.
I mean, there's so many factors at play here, but I think
of course. But
I mean, we're coming to a head when it comes to
what
that.
I'm talking about is this postmodernism, this idea that we can let go of any kind of
Structure,
structure.
truth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Bullshit. Come on. And they act it out. See, that's the one thing that Peterson I agree with. I don't agree with his degree, the degree to which he believes the utility in religious storytelling and beliefs are important. But I do agree that structure is needed. I mean, to that degree, it's bullshit that people really do act them out, even if they say they don't believe, and they act it out to some degree. I mean, you're not going to go out there and murder someone because your burger came to you cold on the plate. You know what I mean? You're not going to go murder yeah, maybe you are. But the point is, you're not going to go, okay, let's use a more appropriate example. You're not going to, chop off the head of the guy who made your kale salad because there's, I don't know, a bug in it, right? And you didn't want to kill the bug, and you, for some reason, I don't know, the weird example. But the point is, there are certain things you don't do. And we don't do them because of a system of morality, a structure that has been kind of constructed over time, and it's very complex. It's a very deeply rooted thing. And so to negate that and be like, doesn't exist, no, not real. And to truly think that you can go on and live in a civil society and one that's productive and happy and all this kind of stuff is bullshit. You're acting out the very things that you're negating. So
yep.
You have no choice to. I mean, trust me, we will see the difference in how these people act, and we indeed do. I mean, you do see some weird things, like polyamory to some degree is a little bit weird in how it manifests itself. I don't see it as completely unnatural, but I do see it as like the mentality, the things that these postmodernists do, and the way that they survive, and the mentality that the lifestyles are so chaotic on some level. A lot of these people are very chaotic in their lives, and it's causing them disturbances and troubles. And so they'll either fall into some kind of drug culture where they end up doing drugs, and they go to like Burning Man, and their entire lives are focused around just festivals and that kind of shit, or they're going to end up in some kind of activism religion where they go and they have to work for Greenpeace, and it's very militant, or they join Antifa. Do you see what I'm saying? They'll find structure within the chaos that they're propagating somehow. It's inevitable that structure is it's inevitable. It's going to resurrect itself within you without you even realizing it. So
once again, like, you don't want your shit mixed with your blood, like it. You are a structure.
Yes, exactly. You can't. It's inescapable. And so, by pure arrogance and pure just arrogance, just the height of arrogance and hypocrisy and just childishness, and so there's just all the gross things. By all of those things, you're going to you're fucking up the natural flow of things you're fucking it up for everybody. Because look, to be progressive is to acknowledge that you want to make progress within the structure that we are erecting. But these people aren't progressive. They're not progressive at all. They just want to blow it up, and it's the most nihilistic thing, maybe even. It's like, let's just kill everything off. Fuck it. Woo! It's like this is chaos. This is pure chaos. I'm not going to use the word anarchy because
it's progressive to the ultimate degree of like,
it's worse.
Let's progress further than life, meaning death.
Yeah. It's not an answer, guys. It's not an answer. Go off like in a cult like Heaven's Gate and drink the Kool-Aid and kill yourselves after hacking off your balls. No problem. But don't come into society and infiltrate and indoctrinate society and fuck things up for the rest of us who just want to actually be progressive.
Yeah, exactly.
So. Okay, it started turning into a rant, but I think it's a good way to end it, dude. I think we've been talking for like 2 or 3 hours. I don't think still be interested.
Do you think you can break this up into 2 parts?
Maybe, I guess so. Yeah. Fuck it. If someone wants to listen, they want to listen. If they don't, they don't, man. It doesn't matter to me. I don't give a fuck.
Sure. It would be cool to have 2 new episodes out of this, but whatever.
All right, bro. I'm gonna end it here, and
Yes,
just stick
it's
around. I'll
way
see you.
later. Oh my God,
Yeah.
fuck. I was hoping to get to bed early tonight. Fuck me. All right.
Too bad. Hmm.
All right, it was worth it.